Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
The show where we give you that deep insight you're looking for fast.
Exactly. We know you're here to get past the surface level stuff and really understand the complex dynamics at play in human interaction.
And that is absolutely our mission today.
Yeah.
We're not just, going through vocabulary lists. We're dissecting advanced communication, C2 level.
We're moving way beyond just grammar.
Oh, way beyond. We're getting into the really powerful stuff, social pragmatics. So how tone and register and just cultural awareness are used to manage things.
To manage expectations, even mitigate conflict.
And to tell stories that actually land, that resonate with people.
So for this, we've been analyzing some high-level exchanges into, two incredibly complex social situations. The source material we're using really focuses on those tiny, subtle differences that separate someone who's, say, a C1 speaker from a true C2 master.
In that first scenario, it's all about external pressure. It's about how we use language to navigate just utter chaos.
And how sometimes you find this unexpected fortune, the serendipity, right in the middle of all that professional stress.
Right. And the second one is, I think, maybe even more challenging.
I'd agree with that.
It's about managing financial problems, but within a very close friendship.
Oh, that's a minefield.
It is. It requires real social diplomacy. The stakes aren't just money, they're dignity, keeping the relationship intact. It takes a very specific, very sophisticated kind of assertiveness.
Okay, so let's set the stage for that first part. We're going to start with 3 high-level concepts that are used to describe life when it's just, operating at full throttle.
These are words that do more than just describe. At this level, they're complex emotional signals.
So we're going to deconstruct the meaning of hectic, coincidence, and overwhelmed.
And these words are really the emotional anchors for our first deep dive here into the language of stress and, good fortune.
Establishing this vocabulary is so important.
It's vital. Because our goal isn't just to report what was said in our source material between Sarah and David. It's to analyze how their words drove the whole narrative.
How they move the conversation emotionally from, cynical burnout to something more philosophical.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this first scenario.
Yeah, the language of high pressure.
And it all starts with that word, hectic. I mean, everyone says I had a hectic day. It usually just means I was very busy.
Right. But at the advanced level, at that C2 proficiency we're talking about, the word has to carry so much more weight. What are we really saying when we use it with precision?
It's almost a declaration, isn't it?
It is. It's a declaration of a loss of control, a state of being, almost disoriented. The sources we looked at are really clear on this.
It's not about the number of tasks.
No, not at all. It's
Yeah.
about a disordered intensity. So advanced users, they'll use collocations and synonyms like frenetic or chaotic.
Or describing your life as a whirlwind of activity.
Exactly that.
I really appreciate that focus on the word frenetic, because a busy day, that can be productive. It can be planned. But a frenetic day, that implies a sort of frantic, maybe even agitated energy.
Yes. The feeling that you are constantly just reacting to things coming at you rather than proactively managing your own schedule.
And that difference is so important for social pragmatics.
It's crucial. When you tell a colleague your schedule is hectic, you're not just communicating the amount of work, you're communicating the stress it's causing.
And in doing that, you're subtly asking for some sympathy or maybe just patience.
You are. It gives you rhetorical leverage. It's an implicit justification for, any potential oversight or a delay in your response.
So it's an efficient way to set a lower bar for your performance when you're under all that pressure.
It is. And that reframing, as you said, as a plea for patience, not just a statement of fact, that is a high-level function of the word.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So let's move to the next one. Overwhelmed. Again, it's a common word, but how does a C2 speaker elevate it beyond just, I'm tired or I'm frustrated?
Overwhelmed moves it from a simple quantitative thing, like I have too much to do, to a qualitative state, a state of emotional and mental saturation.
Saturation, that's a good word for it.
Yeah, and when we look at the usage in the source material, it frames the feeling as being inundated or besieged.
Or emotionally saturated. The imagery there is so important.
It's key. To be inundated is to be flooded. You're basically drowning in demands.
And to be besieged, that sounds like you're under attack from all sides.
It does. And that connects the word overwhelmed directly to a sense of paralysis.
Right. If you're inundated, you just stop swimming.
If you're besieged, you feel trapped. The implication is that all the resources you need to cope, your mental energy, your time, your emotional resilience, they're all gone.
It's a state where you stop problem solving proactively. All you can do is just endure.
And that leads us perfectly to the concept that sometimes emerges from that very chaos: coincidence.
Because when chaos is in charge and control is lost, we start looking for meaning in things that are just random.
We do. In basic English, coincidence is just two unrelated things happening at the same time.
Like two people in a room wearing the same shirt.
Exactly. But in these high-stakes personal stories, we're looking for those moments where outside factors seem to align in this uncanny, almost preordained way.
And the C2 speaker, they're not just going to call that simple chance.
No, they lean towards much more elevated terms like serendipity or synchronicity.
So serendipity, that's the fortunate accidental discovery.
Right. The event itself was totally unplanned, but the outcome is just unequivocally good. It keeps the randomness of the event, but celebrates the positive result.
And what about synchronicity? That feels, a bit heavier.
It does. Synchronicity is a term that was popularized by Carl Jung, and it suggests a meaningful connection between events that don't have a direct causal link.
So it's not just a happy accident.
No. When someone chooses to use the word synchronicity over serendipity, they're elevating the event from just chance to something that feels, destined.
It reflects a kind of philosophical search for order, even in the middle of all that professional, hectic chaos.
And in our scenario, that's what Sarah does. She uses the story to suggest that there's some kind of positive destiny working behind the scenes of her colleague David's chaotic life.
Okay, so with that linguistic foundation, let's jump into the narrative itself, the exchange between Sarah and David, which is all about the stress of their jobs.
And the dialogue, it starts by establishing this shared misery. And they use elevated language to get the maximum impact.
David sets the tone immediately.
He does. He says, "I've been fielding back-to-back inquiries since Monday, and the quarterly reports are looming over me like a storm cloud."
I want to just pause on that image for a second. Looming like a storm cloud. It's so effective.
It really is.
He's not just saying, I have reports due. He's communicating this atmospheric, almost existential dread.
He's comparing a corporate task to a force of nature, something he can't control that's threatening impending doom.
And Sarah, she immediately mirrors that high-level register. She observes that David looks like he's running on fumes.
Again, not just, "You look tired."
Right. It's an idiom that perfectly communicates the internal cost of all that pressure.
And that's C2 efficiency. David's storm cloud is the external threat, and running on fumes is his depleted internal resource. They've painted this vivid, relatable picture of high stress without having to list a single task.
And what's so fascinating is the rhetorical function of all this shared negative language. I mean, they're actually bonding over this intense negative state.
They are. And Sarah then uses that common ground to execute a mood shift. She introduces a story, the story of Jennifer from accounting, to pivot David's focus.
She transitions so smoothly from just commiserating with him, she says brutal is an understatement, to storytelling.
And in doing that, she shifts his mood from what the source calls cynical exhaustion to genuine intrigue.
That narrative structure is such a hallmark of advanced social communication.
It's a performance. It's used not just to give information, but to actually alter the emotional state of the person you're talking to. She's giving David a reason to stop lamenting his hectic schedule and start engaging with the story of redemption.
Okay, so let's dive deep into Jennifer's story, because the crisis she's in is what makes the resolution so powerful.
Yes, and the source material emphasizes that Jennifer was facing immense anxiety over the unforgiving rental market.
And notice the language of the crisis itself, words like brutal, unforgiving.
That's crucial escalation. It signals to David and to us that this isn't some minor inconvenience. Jennifer wasn't just house hunting. She was up against a force that felt actively hostile and relentless.
She was feeling completely overwhelmed, we're told. She was basically resigned to this long, miserable commute from her parents' place forever.
And David's response confirms how deep that despair was. He says, the uncertainty alone is paralyzing.
And there's that link back to our definition of overwhelm, that sense of paralysis.
Her emotional saturation was so intense, she felt like she couldn't take any decisive action. And setting up this high-stakes emotional environment, the brutal market, the paralyzing uncertainty, it's absolutely essential.
Because it raises the psychological stakes for the miracle that's about to happen.
Exactly. If her problem was minor, the solution would be meaningless.
So she's at this emotional low point, her breaking point, and she's grabbing a quick lunch only because she was so hectic that she forgot the packed lunch she usually plans meticulously.
And then, the stroke of luck. A complete stranger, a woman named Lisa, interjects herself into the conversation.
This is such a great moment for pragmatic analysis.
Liz.
Because what Lisa did, eavesdropping and then interrupting a private conversation, is normally a huge social no-no. It's awkward. It should lead to immediate rejection.
But in this hyper-stressed context, it becomes the accidental catalyst for fortune. The social barrier is aggressively broken, but because the outcome is so positive, Sarah reframes it as a stroke of luck, and Jennifer, of course, accepts the intrusion.
And the details of the apartment she finds, that's what makes it feel miraculous in the context of her crisis.
Right. We learn it's a stone's throw from the office, so it saves a ton of time.
It boasts a balcony, which is a luxury.
And the rent is actually within her stipend. It checks every single box. Location, luxury, and affordability. That combination is basically impossible in an unforgiving market.
It's the rhetorical crescendo of the story.
It is. It is the definition of serendipity because the discovery was accidental yet profoundly fortunate. It wasn't earned through, diligent searching. It was stumbled upon because of a failure.
The failure of forgetting her lunch. She went from despair to, absolute elation in one lunch break.
Yes, but the true linguistic synthesis, the moment that the C2 listener should really pay attention to, comes at the very end.
When David, who's been listening to this whole story, connects the initial chaos to the final opportunity.
He synthesizes the two ideas. He says, and to think, if she hadn't been so hectic that she forgot her packed lunch, she never would have entered that bistro.
And that observation is the core intellectual payoff of the whole conversation.
It is. The very thing that made her life miserable, that hectic schedule, was the necessary, unexpected catalyst for her good fortune. The chaos wasn't a barrier.
It was actually steering her toward an opportunity she couldn't have planned for.
An opportunity she couldn't have achieved through any conventional controlled search.
So this gives us a really deep takeaway for the learner. The powerful, emotionally charged vocabulary they used at the beginning, brutal, unforgiving, paralyzing, it was functionally essential.
It amplified the release that came later, and it made sure that the coincidence felt profound and meaningful. Not just random.
If Sarah had downplayed the crisis, the story would have just fallen flat.
Completely. By using C2 vocabulary to communicate the depth of the initial stress, she did several things at once. She justified David's own venting. She bonded with him over their shared professional misery.
And she gave this philosophical weight to the unexpected resolution.
It's just an advanced demonstration of how emotional register drives narrative engagement and social connection.
I wonder, though, could a more critical listener argue that David was being a little, melodramatic, storm cloud, running on fumes? Is that really high-level communication, or is it just hyperbole?
That's a really sharp question. I think the difference lies in their shared context.
Okay.
If you use that language with a stranger or maybe a junior colleague, it might come across as performance, as hyperbole. But with Sarah, who immediately validates it by saying brutal is an understatement.
It becomes a shared, acceptable register of stress.
Exactly. High-level communication is so deeply context-dependent. They're allowed to be linguistically dramatic because they have this high-trust relationship and a shared understanding of their corporate world. It serves the pragmatic function of efficient commiseration.
I see. So the dramatic language is sanctioned by their shared experience.
And the result is that David shifts the conversation from just miserable venting to this hopeful, reflective moment about the relationship between control and chance.
His final thought implies he's sort of reevaluating his own stressful environment in a more positive light.
Precisely. And we see the function of C2 language here just executed beautifully. It expresses a nuanced internal state, it fosters social connection, and it provides a powerful, memorable framework for unpredictable events in a demanding environment.
So we've moved from analyzing that external professional chaos to understanding how advanced language handles, internal conflict.
Right. And now we're transitioning to our second complex social scenario, which deals with the intimate dynamics of friendship when financial realities clash with social expectations.
This is a common and very difficult scenario. It really tests the speaker's proficiency in social diplomacy.
It does. And we need a new set of vocabulary to navigate this internal and interpersonal tension. Our focus now shifts to subtle, reluctant, and assertive.
Let's start with subtle. When we talk about advanced communication, we're moving past the simple definition of just not obvious.
We are. We're talking about reading between the lines, the nuances of behavior and communication that signal an unstated truth.
At the C2 level, being subtle isn't just about hiding things.
No, it's about signaling in a way that respects the other person's ability to interpret the context. The advanced communicator has to be highly observant to even spot these nuances.
It requires a high level of social sensitivity.
And a deep understanding of shared social norms. For instance, a subtle cue might be a slight change in body language or a consistent pattern of absence.
Yeah.
Like declining certain invitations over and over.
Which signals an underlying reluctance or some kind of constraint.
Right. And I think we need to contrast that with the simpler usage.
Okay.
If I'm just quiet because I don't know the answer to a question, that's not subtle communication. That's just silence.
Subtlety implies an intentional lack of directness.
Exactly. It's designed to convey information implicitly, usually because being direct would be socially damaging in some way.
So it's the preferred tool when the truth carries some kind of stigma or just needs a really delicate touch.
It aims to protect both the speaker's ego and the relationship itself. The failure, as we're about to see, is when one person's subtlety is just completely misinterpreted.
Or seen as just a lack of interest or even just the norm.
Exactly.
Okay, so next up is reluctant. I mean, if someone is reluctant, they don't want to do something. But in this context, dealing with personal financial hardship, it takes on a much deeper psychological meaning.
It does. It implies reticence, a specific hesitation to speak, which often stems from a deeper psychological barrier.
In this case, for Jake, it's tied to shame or modesty or the fear of being judged for having financial difficulty.
Right. The reluctance is an internal conflict between the need to communicate his reality and the desire to maintain his social status within the friendship. It's an emotional fence he's put up.
It's the difference between being reluctant to take out the trash and being reluctant to confess what feels like a major personal failing. The second one carries so much more emotional weight and risk.
Absolutely. The C2 analysis links reluctance here to issues of self-worth and perceived failure, especially in a consumerist society. Jake's reluctance isn't laziness. It's an active choice to absorb stress rather than risk social judgment.
And that brings us to the final word, assertive. As you mentioned earlier, this one is so often confused with aggression or being demanding.
It is, and its advanced definition is vital for this kind of social diplomacy.
So what is that definition?
At this level, assertive is defined as advocating for one's own needs with diplomacy and clarity, and, crucially, without aggression.
The goal is resolution. It's about setting boundaries while still preserving the relationship.
Right. Advanced assertiveness means stating a personal reality like, I cannot afford this, in a way that still honors the other person's good intentions. It is the absolute antithesis of the reluctance we were just talking about.
Okay, so let's bring these concepts to life in the scenario with Jake and Emma. The friendship hurdle they face is this birthday dinner reservation.
Yes. Emma, who is determined to celebrate this milestone in style, chose the notoriously expensive restaurant, Le Berdin.
Which is the perfect setup for a clash.
It is, because Emma is being assertive in her role as the celebratory planner. She's signaling how committed she is to the friendship, how important the milestone is.
But she is completely missing the economic reality that Jake is facing.
Completely. Jake, on the other hand, is in the middle of a financial contraction. He's taken a significant pay cut after his company restructured.
So the initial challenge is Jake's total lack of candor. The source material highlights that he was reluctant to voice this because he didn't want to dampen enthusiasm.
And that is the core dilemma of advanced social life, isn't it? Protecting your friends' feelings versus protecting your own financial boundaries.
He prioritizes Emma's emotional investment in the celebration over his own fiscal stability.
He chooses silence or subtlety, hoping he can somehow wiggle out of this expensive commitment without having to confess his hardship.
He believes that by being subtle, he can navigate the situation without having to risk that social stigma of admitting failure.
And this leads him to try to maintain appearances, all while he's secretly scrutinizing every expenditure. The text says he was trying to be subtle about his issues.
Which resulted in Emma being completely oblivious.
And this is a critical failure in communication. Jake's chosen method, subtlety, failed because it relied on Emma being highly observant and interpreting these ambiguous signals correctly.
He was hiding, not skillfully maneuvering.
Exactly. His cues were subtle only to the extent that they were invisible to an unattuned eye. And Emma, caught up in the assertive excitement of her planning, was emotionally deaf to the nonverbal cues.
The source gives some concrete examples of the cues Emma missed, right?
It does. She realizes, but only later, that Jake had been consistently declining recent invitations to things like happy hour, a pretty common casual expense.
And she had just attributed it to him being busy.
Which is a powerful learning moment for anyone aspiring to that C2 level. High-level communication is about active, critical observation. Jake's repeated absence from casual social spending was a clear, subtle signal of financial distress.
But Emma just defaulted to the easiest, most convenient explanation, the professional excuse. He's busy.
She failed to synthesize multiple subtle cues into a coherent, underlying narrative of difficulty.
I have to ask, though, if Emma is supposed to be this master communicator, why does she miss those signals?
And that's where the C2 distinction gets really interesting. Emma's expertise, at that moment, was all focused on assertive planning and social execution.
She was performing a role, the enthusiastic friend.
Exactly. When you are focused on executing a vision like this expensive birthday dinner, you sometimes lose the bandwidth for passive critical observation. The subtle signals from other people just become noise.
So it highlights that C2 proficiency isn't some constant state. It's an active choice to be attuned to the necessary register.
She prioritized her own assertion over her observation.
So Jake eventually has to abandon this failed strategy of subtlety. He has to admit his financial reality, and that creates this potentially awkward, fraught moment where the friendship is tested by the realities of money.
Yes, and the extravagance of a place like Le Bernardin just magnified his internal conflict exponentially. He felt trapped between fiscal responsibility and social expectation. His initial reluctance was a form of self-preservation, but it actually put the friendship at greater risk by delaying the necessary, candid conversation.
You know, this scenario really hits home because of the strong stigma attached to financial instability, especially among high-achieving professionals.
It does. Let's dive back into Jake's perspective to fully understand why his reluctance was so intense.
Okay.
Jake's reluctance is rooted in cultural pragmatics. Being direct about needing to save money, for him, felt like admitting a failure in his career.
The sources point to the societal stigma attached to financial instability.
Right. For Jake, expressing this truth felt like admitting he was falling behind, which made it emotionally difficult to be direct without sounding, pitiful or damaging his professional identity.
And that emotional cost explains why he initially chose the high-risk path of subtlety over the immediate pain of clear assertiveness.
Exactly. And that context sets the stage perfectly for Emma's response. Once the truth is finally out, she performs what the source calls a masterclass in saving face for Jake.
And this is the moment of C2 social diplomacy we really need to dissect.
Her response is just, well, it's brilliant, because it completely sidesteps the financial issue.
If she had responded with pity or offered to pay for him.
Oh, that would have immediately introduced an emotional or financial imbalance that could have damaged the friendship long term.
Instead, she uses a strategy of mutual validation to pivot the entire conversation.
She doesn't minimize his issue, but she reframes it. She shifts the blame, not to Jake, but to the venue and the social expectations that it represents.
She actually admits her own prior reluctance about the dinner. She says, it feels rather performative, doesn't it? Stiff colors and hushed tones.
And that word, performative, is the linchpin. It is the perfect diplomatic pivot.
Why that word?
By choosing a sophisticated, culturally attuned critique like performative, she provides an equally compelling non-financial reason to dislike the original plan. She makes the issue about social philosophy, not about Jake's wallet.
She validates his discomfort by sharing a similar, though separate, dislike for that kind of extravagance.
So she essentially asserts that the expensive, planned venue was actually a source of mutual discomfort all along.
Which makes the change a mutual decision based on shared social values, not a concession to his lack of money.
It transitions the reason for changing the plan from Jake can't afford it to we both prefer authenticity and intimacy.
She was being assertive about the idea of celebrating, but was flexible enough to apply diplomatic subtlety to the details of the venue when new information came to light.
It just showcases this high-level ability to adjust your register instantly in response to new, sensitive information.
And this reframing allows her to introduce the new plan so effortlessly. It's not a downgrade from the extravagant restaurant to a dinner party at her place.
It's a rebranding. It becomes something better, something more personal.
And this rebranding is cemented by that final stroke of genius.
The shared investment.
She tells Jake to bring his legendary tiramisu.
And that is so critical. By tasking him with bringing his signature contribution, she integrates him into the new plan as a valued, essential contributor.
It completely reestablishes his status within the friendship. He goes from being the supplicant who can't afford the meal
to the co-host, who is responsible for the legendary dessert. It eliminates all the awkwardness and the power imbalance that was created by his financial disclosure.
It absolutely showcases the ultimate goal of C2 communication in a social crisis,
which is to have the cheaper, simpler option become the socially preferable option. The value of the celebration shifts from external metrics, like the price tag,
to internal shared metrics, like the intimacy and the contribution of the friends.
This whole exchange is just so rich.
So what's the ultimate takeaway on vulnerability and assertiveness from Jake's journey?
It all culminates in Jake's final reflection on the experience. He says, I suppose vulnerability requires its own kind of assertiveness.
And that is the core lesson, isn't it? Both linguistically and psychologically.
It is. Being truly assertive often means advocating for your emotional or financial reality with unwavering clarity. Jake realized he needed to supersede the initial comfort of subtlety, which nearly cost him the celebration, and risk vulnerability to get a better outcome.
So while subtlety is a diplomatic tool, it's not a good substitute for boundaries.
Not at all. And for Emma, it reinforces the role of observation. C2 mastery isn't just about clear speaking, it's the constant monitoring and synthesis of subtle behavioral changes, like the declined happy hours, rather than just waiting for someone to say something explicitly.
So subtlety is excellent for providing nuance and allowing others to save face, which is what Emma did with that performative comment.
But assertiveness is non-negotiable when you're defining personal boundaries or expressing distress. Jake's initial subtlety led to anxiety. Emma's later subtlety ensured dignity.
It really proves that C2 proficiency isn't about reciting vocabulary. It's about navigating the emotional landscape of human interaction with grace, efficiency, and deep social awareness.
And if we look across both scenarios now, we start to see a pattern in the successful communication strategies.
In the Jennifer story, David and Sarah used that vivid, heightened vocabulary, hectic, paralyzed, unforgiving, to create an emotional narrative that justified the miraculous outcome.
And in the Jake and Emma story, they used pragmatic, critical vocabulary, assertive, subtle, performative, to redefine the terms of a relationship without causing shame.
So the lesson is clear. Advanced communication is never passive. It is always active, it's strategic, and it's aimed at managing the emotional and social environment around the speakers. #conclusion key takeaways.
So we've synthesized the learning from both of these scenarios, and the common thread here is the sophisticated application of language for, well, emotional navigation and relationship management.
In the first case, with the professional chaos, complex vocabulary and these really vivid images allowed Sarah to share an intense experience and soften David's despair with the excitement of Jennifer's miracle.
The high-level language was leveraged to amplify that feeling of serendipity and shift the entire mood of the conversation.
And in the second scenario, the nuanced usage allowed Emma to use diplomatic assertiveness to soften the potential social blow of Jake's financial reality,
preserving his dignity while successfully redefining the parameters of their celebration. I mean, that masterful use of the word performative as a social critique just saved the friendship.
So for you, the learner, the sources we're looking at, they all reiterate this foundational truth. Achieving this level of linguistic proficiency is a marathon, not a sprint.
It relies so heavily on accumulating these small, nuanced understandings, not just of what a C2 word means in a dictionary, but what it does in a high-stakes social context.
So advanced learning requires active observation.
It does. You have to observe how people shift register, like moving from the professional register of busy to the highly charged emotional register of hectic, to communicate distress.
You have to observe how they use idioms to describe their internal feelings and how they diplomatically pivot to avoid shame or conflict.
And at the end of the day, we're reminded that communication, whether it's professional venting or discussing deep financial issues, is fundamentally about narrative construction.
And emotional connection and navigation, it's so much more than just being grammatically correct.
The successful narrative arc, from stress to relief, or from disappointment to preferred authenticity, that is the measure of advanced proficiency.
Let's pull one last crucial thought from that Jennifer scenario.
Okay.
We saw that her chaotic schedule was the catalyst for her good fortune, for that serendipity. She was forced out of her routine. Now contrast that with Jake,
whose attempt to impose control, to stay subtle and hide his financial reality, nearly led to disaster.
That dynamic between control and surrender in communication, that is a critical space for a C2 speaker to master. #outro.
We saw two different approaches to handling pressure. Jennifer surrendered to the external chaos, and fortune arrived. Jake, he attempted social control through subtlety, and it led to emotional isolation and relationship risk.
And Emma used diplomatic control, her assertiveness, to save the relationship once that vulnerability was finally expressed.
So we want to ask you to consider this for your own life. When is it more effective in your high-stakes conversations to just be subtle and observe, to let the chaos or the other person's narrative run its course without you intervening?
When does that silent observation serve you best?
And conversely, when must you risk that vulnerability and choose assertiveness, that uncomfortable clarity, to steer the situation toward a better, more honest, and ultimately more authentic outcome?
The decision to engage, to be subtle, or to be assertive, that often defines the difference between simply speaking English and truly mastering advanced social communication.
It's a delicate, ongoing balance, and one we hope this deep dive helps you to better manage.
Thank you for joining us as we explored the hidden meanings and subtle cues of advanced conversation. Keep listening, keep observing, and keep refining your craft.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is all about what you might call linguistic leverage.
That's a great way to put it.
We're moving past the point where language is just for, getting your point across. We're stepping into the world of C2 proficiency.
Right. Where words become tools, strategic tools.
Exactly. It stops being about what you're saying and becomes all about how you say it, especially when the stakes are high, emotions are a mess, or, a conflict is just starting to bubble up.
That is precisely it. C2 fluency isn't about talking fast. It's about precision. It's the skill of navigating ambiguity, of handling these high-pressure social dynamics.
And the sources we're digging into today really illustrate this. They show how mastering a few very specific advanced words can let you disagree without being disagreeable.
And manage workplace conflict without, burning all your bridges. And maybe the most important part, how to actually articulate the messy, mixed-up truth of big life changes.
Yeah, our sources really break this down into two essential categories. The first one we're calling diplomacy. And this is all about the external stuff, managing how people see you, navigating criticism, especially in a really demanding professional setting.
And the second is ambivalence, which is the internal side of the coin. It's about giving a name, a real linguistic shape, to those complex, mixed-up feelings.
Like when you get something you've wanted forever, but you realize you have to leave something really important behind to take it.
That exact feeling. That pull in two directions.
So our goal in this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We want to shortcut your learning curve by unpacking 6 critical words. These aren't just vocabulary, they're like surgical instruments for communication.
We have 2 sets of 3. For that professional arena, that diplomatic battlefield, we're going to analyze the power of scrutiny inadvertently and diplomatic.
And then for navigating those deeper emotional waters, we'll explore ambivalent, sentimental, and inevitable. By the time we're done here, you should be able to not just understand these words, but to use them.
To deploy them consciously, yeah. To clarify your own thoughts, and honestly, to command the room a little bit more effectively.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Let's start with that high-pressure world of professional diplomacy.
Let's do it.
So the scene our sources give us is, I think, instantly relatable for a lot of people. You have 2 colleagues, Mark and Elena, and they're debriefing after a really tense, grueling board meeting.
And the context is everything here. The company just posted a quarterly loss.
Which changes the entire atmosphere in a company.
Oh, completely. When money is tight and confidence is low, the whole environment just snaps into this risk-averse, hypercritical mode. It can feel hostile, frankly.
Right, because every single proposal, every idea is suddenly viewed through this lens of fear. How could this go wrong? How could this lose us more money?
Exactly. And that heightened level of institutional fear leads us directly to our first key word, scrutiny.
Now, I think on the surface, we all kind of get what scrutiny means, looking at something closely.
Yeah.
But the C2 distinction is what matters. The sources describe Mark's reaction. He said he felt like his budget proposal was under a microscope.
A microscope, not just on the table.
And he felt the level of scrutiny was, and this is his word, absurd, for what was just a preliminary pitch. This is way beyond a simple review.
Exactly. If you just define scrutiny as looking closely, you miss all the important nuance, The definition we're really focusing on implies a critical, detailed, and often harsh examination.
It's designed to find flaws.
It is specifically designed to detect flaws, weaknesses, potential liabilities. When someone reviews your document, they're checking for compliance, for basic errors.
Like a spell check.
Sort of, yeah. But when they subject it to scrutiny, they are actively, consciously searching for reasons to say no, to reject it.
That's such a powerful distinction. So if I'm prepping for a big presentation, I shouldn't just be thinking, okay, they're going to look at my numbers.
Yeah.
I should be thinking they're actively hunting for the one weak assumption I've made, the one calculation I might have missed. That completely changes how you prepare.
It changes everything. Let's compare it to some weaker synonyms. A review, a check. A review is basically a neutral process. The default assumption is that the work is probably fine.
Right. Let's just make sure.
Exactly. But scrutiny implies skepticism from the word go. It carries a heavy psychological weight. Mark felt personally attacked by it. He felt the director's intense gaze on his work as a judgment on him as a person.
And this is where Elena, who our sources frame as the expert diplomat in this scenario, steps in. She doesn't dismiss his feelings. She says, yes, the scrutiny was harsh.
She validates him, which is critical.
But then she immediately anchors it back to the bigger picture, the organizational context, the quarterly loss. She depersonalizes the whole thing.
And this depersonalization, that is the C2 skill right there.
Yeah.
That's what we need to internalize. Mark's internal narrative is, they think my work is bad, they think I'm incompetent. Elena reframes it. She says, no, they are scared. They're scared of losing more money. The intense scrutiny isn't about Mark's competence. It's the organization's fear made manifest. It's a symptom of risk aversion driven by external financial pressure.
That's a huge reframe.
Yeah.
But let me push back on that for a second.
Please.
Because even if Mark understands that, if his work is under scrutiny, isn't it still his problem? I mean, how does knowing why they're scrutinizing it actually help him respond in the moment? He still has to defend his budget, right?
That's a fair challenge. A really good one. And this is where that linguistic understanding creates a tactical advantage.
Okay.
If Mark continues to see the scrutiny as a personal attack, what's his response going to be?
Defensive, emotional. He'll start talking about how hard he worked.
Exactly. He'll get flustered. He'll argue about his process, his credentials, how many hours he put in. And in doing so, he accidentally proves their unspoken point, that he's unstable under pressure.
And that's a losing game.
It's the definition of a losing game. But by understanding that the scrutiny is driven by this organizational fear, Mark can shift his response. He can go from being defensive to being proactive.
So instead of defending himself, he defends his idea in a different way.
A completely different way. Elena advises him, instead of defending the budget line by line, to preemptively address their core fear, their terror of risk.
So he should walk in and just name the elephant in the room.
Precisely. He should start his next response by saying something like, I understand that given the recent quarterly results, mitigating further risk is paramount for all of us.
Wow. Okay, that's a power move.
It is. And then he follows it with, so with that in mind, let me walk you through the 3 specific fail-safes we've built into this budget to ensure capital preservation.
That's a completely different conversation. He's not defending anymore, he's leading. He's acknowledging their pain point before they can even use it as a weapon against him.
He's on their side of the table now, solving their problem. So the key takeaway here, for you, the listener, is this. When you find yourself under that kind of intense scrutiny, you have to recognize that the intensity is almost always a symptom of a larger systemic issue.
Market conditions, bad leadership, a recent failure, something.
Something bigger than you. And if you can understand that context, you can depersonalize the experience, you can focus on the objective problem, and you can strategically position your response to soothe the organization's anxiety.
Not just your own ego.
Exactly. And in that moment, you elevate yourself immediately from just a contributor defending their little piece of the puzzle to a leader who is managing the organization's risk.
That reframe alone is, wow, it's worth the entire deep dive.
It's a fundamental shift.
Okay, so Mark has sort of processed the external pressure, the scrutiny, but he's still really angry at one person in particular.
Right.
Simon, a senior partner.
Simon?
Simon interrupted him during the meeting, corrected a minor point about a timeline, and it made Mark feel openly undermined, incompetent.
This is a classic boardroom power play, whether intentional or not. And it brings us to the second word in our professional set. And this is a fantastic word for cooling down these hot organizational conflicts. The word is inadvertently.
The sources we looked at actually called this a power word for conflict resolution.
And they are not wrong.
I totally agree. Inadvertently just means doing something without intention or accidentally. It sounds simple, but the way you can apply it in a professional conflict is incredibly sophisticated.
It's the ultimate tool for granting someone the benefit of the doubt, especially when that someone has just hurt your feelings or, damaged your reputation in a public forum.
When you use inadvertently, you're performing a kind of linguistic surgery.
That's a great way to put it. You're separating the action from the intent. The action was harmful. The intent you're suggesting was not.
So let's break down the scenario with Simon. Mark's feeling is, Simon actively undermined me. He corrected a small detail and embarrassed me in front of the whole board.
Right. So if Mark is venting to Elena, he's probably saying things like, Simon deliberately humiliated me, or Simon was being arrogant and rude.
Which are accusations of malice, of bad intent.
And Elena immediately rejects that interpretation. She doesn't deny the action happened, but she offers a different motive. She suggests Simon only undermined Mark inadvertently.
Because, as she puts it, Simon is the kind of guy who gets fixated on details and forgets the broader picture.
There it is. She's offering an alternative explanation for Simon's behavior, an explanation rooted not in malice, but in incompetence, a poor communication style.
So it's not that Simon is a bad person, it's that he's bad at meetings.
Precisely. Let's compare inadvertently with its cousins, accidentally and unintentionally. Accidentally often implies a physical clumsiness, like you accidentally spilled coffee on someone.
Okay.
Unintentionally is a bit broader, meaning without a plan, but inadvertently is sharper. It focuses on the consequence being unintended, even if the action itself was deliberate.
Ah, that's the distinction. Simon deliberately chose to speak and interrupt Mark. That was a choice.
Yes, but the consequence of that choice, which was Mark feeling humiliated and incompetent, was, Elena argues, inadvertent. He didn't mean for that to be the outcome.
That's a subtle, but it's a monumental shift in perspective.
It is.
Because the focus moves from Simon is an evil person trying to sabotage my career to Simon has a communication flaw that we need to manage.
Yes, and think about the practical result of that shift. If Elena had just agreed with Mark, if she'd said, yeah, Simon is a malicious jerk,
Mark would have gotten more angry. He'd be plotting his revenge.
Exactly. He would have escalated the situation, maybe sought retribution, maybe just started freezing Simon out of future projects. The conflict grows.
But by using inadvertently, she performs this kind of linguistic jujitsu.
Perfect. She uses the energy of Mark's anger, but redirects it. She softens Simon's intent, turning him from this intentional villain into, as the source says, a clumsy communicator.
And the practical application here is just profound. Mark's emotional energy instantly shifts. He can stop wasting time and effort on hating the villain and start focusing on fixing the process.
Right. The conversation can now become, okay, how do we make sure that next time Simon's detail fixation doesn't inadvertently derail the entire presentation?
Which leads to actual solutions.
Yeah.
Like pre-briefing Simon on the timeline so he doesn't feel the need to correct them live.
Actionable solutions instead of endless, draining interpersonal feuds. That's the goal.
And this goes so far beyond the boardroom. Think about a personal relationship. A partner forgets an anniversary or a birthday.
A classic conflict point.
Saying you deliberately ignored something important to me is an accusation. It starts a fight. But saying, I know it wasn't your intention, but you inadvertently hurt my feelings by forgetting is, it's an invitation to a conversation.
It creates psychological safety. Using inadvertently is a powerful way to grant yourself and others a bit of grace. It lets you acknowledge that a negative thing happened, a real harm was done, without having to insist that malicious intent was the driving force.
And in a high-stakes professional world where you have to maintain alliances with people you don't always like, that's a superpower.
It is the absolute hallmark of C2 linguistic maturity. It is the language of preserving bridges you might need to cross again tomorrow.
That's a perfect way to put it. Okay, so Mark has now processed the external scrutiny and the internal resentment that Simon inadvertently caused. But we're not out of the woods. We still have the fallout from his own emotional reaction.
He lost his temper.
He did. He snapped.
Which brings us to the ultimate test of linguistic diplomacy. How do you apologize for your own bad behavior without completely undermining your professional standard?
Right, because the conversation moves forward, and Mark is clearly still mortified by what he did. He admits he snapped at a senior partner, telling him to let me finish. Yeah, and he knew, in that split second, that it was a completely undiplomatic moment. The room went silent. He lost a lot of political capital in that instant.
He allowed the pressure from the intense scrutiny to just override his professional facade. And the damage there isn't to his idea. The budget pitch might still be brilliant. The damage is to his perceived character.
His fitness for leadership. Is this person stable? Can he handle pressure?
Exactly. Which is where our third word comes in. So let's focus on the one diplomatic. Our source defines it as dealing with people sensitively and effectively. It's the linguistic opposite of being blunt, aggressive, or rude.
It's the language of tact.
It's the language of tact, of social awareness. Diplomatic behavior is all about maximizing the positive reception of your entire message. That means both your content and your conduct.
So his pitch was maybe, I don't know, 70% content, 30% conduct?
Let's say. And in that one moment, he allowed 100% of the room's attention to pivot to the 30% where he failed.
So he needs to fix it. He needs to issue a sophisticated apology. And this is where Elena's advice, that C2 skill, is just a masterclass. Her core strategy is this: do not apologize for the content of the pitch. Apologize only for the tone.
This is a tactical masterstroke. Think about it. If Mark apologizes for the pitch itself, what happens?
He validates the critics. He's basically saying, you were right to scrutinize me. My ideas are weak. He could lose funding, lose backing for the project.
It's a total capitulation. But if he apologizes only for his tone, he validates the audience's reaction to his conduct. He's respecting the social contract of the workplace without giving up an inch of his intellectual ground.
He's decoupling the message from the messenger.
Perfectly said. He's decoupling the content from the delivery mechanism.
But just saying, sorry, I was rude, sounds weak. It sounds like something a kid says. Elena's advice is way more sophisticated. She advises framing the rudeness not as a moment of weakness or frustration, but as a symptom of passion.
And this is the genius of perception management. You take a negative behavior, the angry interruption, and you attribute it to an overwhelmingly positive professional trait. Commitment, dedication, or in this case, enthusiasm.
It reframes his aggression as an excess of virtue.
Yes. I'm so committed to this project that my passion occasionally overflows. It's brilliant.
So let's break down the exact phrasing she suggests, because every word here matters. The line is, I regret if my enthusiasm for the timeline came across as abrasive.
Let's analyze that. First, I regret if. It's softer, it's more indirect than I'm sorry that I was rude. The if leaves a tiny sliver of ambiguity about whether the abrasive perception was even justified. It's very subtle.
And then the crucial part. He substitutes all that negative language, snapping, rudeness, frustration, with the corporate virtue word, enthusiasm.
He's not apologizing for his substance for being wrong. He's apologizing for the sheer magnitude of his drive. The subtext is, I am so invested in making this company successful with this timeline, my commitment simply overloaded the politeness filter for a second.
Wow. And that implies the fault lies not in his lack of emotional control, but in the overwhelming strength of his dedication.
Which is a highly, highly diplomatic way to manage perceptions under pressure. He acknowledges the tension he created, he neutralizes the conduct failure, and this is key. He simultaneously reinforces his commitment to the project he was defending.
Okay, but hang on. Let me step back and challenge this, because this feels, I don't know, incredibly manipulative.
Fair point.
Isn't this just a very fancy, well-worded lie? If Mark was genuinely frustrated and unprofessional, is this diplomatic phrasing really ethical? Or is it just politically savvy maneuvering?
That is the right question to ask, because C2 proficiency often sits right on that razor's edge between high skill and high strategy. Is it politically savvy? Absolutely yes. Is it inherently unethical? I would argue no.
Okay, explain that distinction.
The core goal here is not personal confession, it's organizational function. The board doesn't need Mark to have a therapy session and confess his deep-seated frustrations.
They need a competent, stable leader who can execute a plan.
Exactly. Mark knows he has to salvage his reputation to effectively implement his strategy, which he believes is good for the company. If he goes in and says, look, I was tired and overwhelmed and I just snapped, he's revealing a weakness that compromises his standing and maybe the project itself.
So diplomacy in this context says your primary duty is to maintain stability and project competence.
The phrasing ensures the focus returns to his ideas, which he believes are sound, rather than his momentary emotional lapse. So, yes, diplomatic language here is a form of damage control, but it prioritizes the organizational mission over a personal, emotional purge.
I see. So Elena is stressing that reacting emotionally just proves the critic's right. It makes him look unstable.
But responding diplomatically with this kind of nuanced language, reframing the conduct, makes him look like the leader in the room who can control his narrative and his emotions. It signals maturity.
So diplomacy is strength.
Yeah.
It's control. It's the difference between being seen as a volatile subordinate and a passionate leader.
That shift is enormous.
Okay, let's pivot now, completely. We're going to move from that external high-tension world of corporate battles to the complex, quiet tension of the internal emotional landscape.
A fascinating transition, because the environment changes from a boardroom to an apartment, but the need for linguistic precision remains exactly the same. We're going from managing perception for other people to managing understanding for ourselves.
The scene shifts. We're now with Sophie and Liam. Sophie has just gotten her dream promotion, which means a move to London. She's in her apartment packing her life into boxes, and she's feeling profoundly strange and conflicted, even though this is a huge success.
And that emotional complexity brings us immediately to the first word in our emotional set, ambivalent.
This has to be one of the most widely misused words in English.
Yeah.
And mastering its true definition is just essential for C2 precision.
We have to state this right at the top. Ambivalent does not mean indifferent. It is not, I don't care.
Let's break down the word itself. The etymology is so clear. It comes from the Latin ambi, which means both sides.
Like ambidextrous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And valent, which means value or strength. So it literally means having two opposing values or strengths pulling on you at the exact same time.
Exactly. Feeling two powerful, opposing emotions simultaneously. Immense joy and profound sadness. Deep longing for the future and crippling nostalgia for the past. It's the simultaneous presence of two strong, valid, and contradictory emotional currents.
And Sophie just articulates this perfectly in the source.
Yeah.
The London job is the success she's worked for. It's her dream. But standing there, seeing her life packed into cardboard boxes, gives her what she calls a heavy sense of loss. And she concludes, honestly, I'm feeling incredibly ambivalent about the whole thing.
And that is C2 precision. She's identifying and naming a complex internal state. A less articulate speaker might just say they feel confused or weird, or maybe I'm happy but also a little bit sad.
Which doesn't really capture the weight of it.
Not at all. Ambivalent is the single word that captures the structural tension of her experience. The joy of the achievement and the grief of the separation are given equal weight. They coexist.
And you can really see the power of the word when you contrast it with that common misuse, indifference. If Sophie were indifferent about the move, what would she be doing?
She'd just be packing the boxes, no feeling at all, whistling maybe, no sense of loss whatsoever.
Indifference is a flat line, an absence of emotional investment.
Whereas ambivalence implies a very high degree of emotional investment, just in two opposing directions. If she were indifferent, her friend Liam would probably be worried that she never cared about her life there in the first place. But because she's ambivalent, he knows she's deeply invested in both her past and her future.
And Liam's insight, which comes next, is really the core of this whole section. He tells Sophie that being ambivalent is actually a good thing.
This is the key psychological shift that this word provides. Liam argues that if she were leaving with zero regrets, with no sadness at all, it would imply that her time there, the life she built, was meaningless.
The mixed emotions, the ambivalence, is the proof that what she's leaving behind was real, that it mattered.
That is so profound. It totally transforms the word. It's no longer describing some paralyzing state of confusion. It becomes a validating sign of a life well lived.
So the takeaway for the listener is this. Ambivalence isn't confusion. It's a sign of a rich, meaningful experience.
It implies depth. Think about a manager who gets promoted and has to leave their team. If they feel only excitement, you might wonder how connected they really were to their people.
Right.
But if they feel ambivalent thrilled by the new challenge, but genuinely sad to leave their direct reports behind, that feeling confirms the depth of those relationships. It confirms their success as a leader.
So by using the word ambivalent, Sophie can grant both her happiness and her grief equal validity. The grief doesn't have to undermine the achievement anymore.
Exactly. She's not letting the confusion paralyze her. She's naming the tension. And in naming it, she's accepting it as a necessary, even beautiful part of growth. When you can articulate your complex feelings with that level of accuracy, the feelings become manageable. They stop being this overwhelming, chaotic fog.
It's the language of emotional integration. She's integrating the past version of herself with the future version of herself, and ambivalent is the word that describes that merging point.
Yes. And as she continues this process, continues packing, her focus narrows. She starts to look at the small, seemingly insignificant things, the detritus of daily life.
And that leads her and us to our next vocabulary word. This is that part of any move where you find some dusty souvenir or a beat-up book you forgot you owned, and suddenly you're just stopped in your tracks by a flood of memory. This brings us to sentimental value.
And here we need to analyze the distinction between something being sentimental and it just having a general emotional attachment. Our sources define sentimental as referring to feelings of tenderness, sadness, or nostalgia that are often attached specifically to memories or objects.
And crucially, objects that are otherwise worthless in a practical sense.
That's the key. They have no utility value.
The scenario they give is just beautifully specific. Sophie says she's getting sentimental looking across the street at this little coffee shop where she and Liam used to study. But she immediately tries to rationalize the feeling away. She says it's ridiculous because objectively, the coffee was bad and the croissants were stale.
She's trying to apply the criteria of utility, of culinary quality, to an experience that is defined entirely by its sentimental value. And that's a common mistake we all make when we're in a moment of transition. We confuse an object's market worth with its emotional worth.
But Liam, again, he gently corrects her. He makes that crucial distinction. The feeling isn't about the quality of the croissant. It's about the sentimental value. And he says this amazing line, it's about who you were when you ate them.
That phrase is a perfect summary of the entire concept. The value is rooted in the identity the object represents. That coffee shop, despite its mediocre pastries, is an anchor for her identity. Her identity as a student, as a young professional just starting out, as a person on the verge of success.
And her fear, as she says, is that leaving means erasing the version of myself that lived here.
So the takeaway for you listening is that sentimental value is about identity, not utility. A pristine, brand new laptop has high utility value. A rusted trophy from a forgotten childhood soccer game has almost zero utility, but it can have immense sentimental value because it maps to a specific point in your personal history.
And being able to articulate that is so important. If Sophie could only say, I feel sad about leaving this old coffee shop, it just sounds kind of childish or silly.
Right.
But saying, I recognize the profound sentimental value this place holds for me because it reflects a core part of my identity formation. That's mature. That's self-aware. It honors the past without getting trapped in it.
It allows her to categorize the sadness and understand its source. She's not sad about the physical building. She's feeling nostalgia for the time and the identity she inhabited in that space. And that recognition is a form of liberation.
It helps her decide what's worth keeping.
Yes. Think about finding an old handwritten letter from a grandparent. The paper is cheap, the ink is faded, it has no monetary value. But its sentimental value is immense because it represents a relationship, a connection, a moment in time that helps define who you are.
And if you can define that value as sentimental, you can honor it, you can keep the memory, and then you can logically decide if the physical object itself is worth the space in one of those London-bound boxes.
That clarity helps you decide which memories to integrate into your next chapter and which relics you can respectfully let go of. And this process moves her closer to a state of acceptance, which leads directly to our final keyword.
So she's processed the complex mixture of her ambivalence. She's understood the rootedness of her sentimental feelings. And now she moves toward a necessary conclusion about her entire situation. And she uses the word inevitable.
Inevitable. It's defined simply as something that is certain to happen and is impossible to avoid.
We usually pair it with negative things, right? Death, taxes, failure.
We do. But here, the source applies inevitable specifically to change itself.
This is a really powerful application. Sophie says, I guess change is inevitable. But then she qualifies it. She says, I just didn't expect it to feel so final.
And her using that word inevitable is critical for her psychological progression. Why do you think that is?
Well, it feels like it marks the moment she stops fighting.
It marks the absolute transition from resistance to acceptance. When you resist change, you are just draining your emotional energy, fighting a force you can never beat, the passage of time.
So by naming the change as inevitable, Sophie is acknowledging that this chapter of her life is closing, not because she made a mistake or failed, but because time, by its very nature, moves forward.
She stops fighting the reality of the move. Let's compare inevitable with a simpler word like unavoidable or certain. Certain is a neutral descriptor, a fact. But inevitable often carries with it this gravitas of fate, of destiny. It suggests that this particular outcome was woven into the fabric of reality, and that gives the change a weight that both justifies her sadness and at the same time demands her acceptance.
I see that in a business context too, an organizational restructuring. If the CEO says, this merger is unavoidable, It just sounds like a logistical problem we have to deal with.
Yeah, it's a hassle.
But if they say, given the market forces, this reorganization was inevitable, it frames the painful change as a necessary structural consequence of external reality. It makes resistance feel futile and shifts the focus toward, okay, how do we integrate and move forward?
That's a perfect example. And for Sophie, applying inevitable to the sadness itself is what finally allows her to move on. She accepts the sadness as just part of the deal of success.
And Liam's final piece of advice really encapsulates this. He tells her to acknowledge the inevitable sadness because it's the proof that she built a life worth missing.
But, and this is the crucial part, he cautions her not to let that sadness overshadow the achievement.
She can hold both truths at the same time.
She can. She can honor the inevitable sadness of a chapter ending while simultaneously being hungry for the future that she worked so hard to create.
And that is the ultimate lesson here in C2 emotional management. These words, they're not just labels, they provide the framework for emotional integration. By using inevitable, she stops seeing the move as a loss of her old life and starts viewing it as the necessary progression to the next phase.
She isn't erasing her past self. She's acknowledging that the transition is necessary and unavoidable, and that the sadness is actually a healthy byproduct of her own success.
This has been an incredibly deep exploration. I mean, how precision language really functions as a tool for managing both external conflict and our own internal complexity.
It's amazing how connected they are. We started in that high-tension corporate world where words like scrutiny and inadvertently are used to manage conflict and reputation, and we transitioned seamlessly to the quiet, intimate world of self-reflection where ambivalent and sentimental are used to articulate a rich internal life.
And the common thread really is that C2 fluency is all about the precision with which you describe reality. Whether that's using diplomatic phrasing to apologize for your tone without giving up your core idea,
which is a strategic masterstroke.
Or using ambivalent to describe a feeling that proves your emotional connections were actually genuine. These words are the foundation of a more sophisticated way of living.
Look at the practical impact we've discussed. In the professional world, using inadvertently de-escalates a conflict. It separates error from intent. It allows the team to focus on fixing the process, not on personal revenge.
And using diplomatic language can turn what was a moment of emotional failure into a demonstration of passionate leadership.
And then in the personal sphere, using ambivalent lets you honor the complexity of a huge life change. It validates both your joy and your grief.
Understanding sentimental value confirms that your identity is rooted in memory, not just in the utility of the things you own. And finally, accepting the inevitable nature of change is what allows you to move forward without being emotionally paralyzed by unnecessary loss.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening, who wants to apply this knowledge?
We'd encourage you to take these 6 words: scrutiny, inadvertently, ambivalent, diplomatic, inevitable, sentimental. Take them and consciously try to apply them to your own life this week. Don't just file them away as vocabulary. Use them as analytical tools.
When a conflict comes up at work, ask yourself, was that person's action really malicious, or was it perhaps inadvertent? When you finally achieve a huge goal that requires a difficult goodbye, don't just call yourself confused. Ask, am I actually feeling ambivalent?
Consciously deploying these precise linguistic tools, it won't just dramatically improve your communication with others, it will also bring a tremendous amount of clarity to your own internal thoughts and feelings.
It turns that chaotic emotion into structured, manageable information.
And as we close out this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Our whole discussion today showed how using precise language fundamentally changes the perception of a situation, both for you and for others.
We saw that if you call a rude outburst frustration, you reveal a weakness. But if you call that same outburst enthusiasm, you demonstrate control and passion.
So if the language we use to describe our experiences ultimately dictates how we feel about them and how other people react to us,
what version of your life, both professional and personal, are you currently, and perhaps inadvertently, creating simply by not using precise emotional and diplomatic language?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the language of precision.
Stay curious. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in for a really deep exploration of intellectual power. We're focusing not just on, what we know, but really on the advanced language that's required to evaluate that knowledge.
Right.
And then crucially, how to successfully communicate that evaluation to other people. This deep dive is, It's our shortcut to mastering a kind of high-level professional precision.
That's exactly right. We're moving beyond just knowing things, which is, table stakes these days.
Yeah.
We're moving into the subtle art of the intellect, what the research we looked at calls discernment and evaluation.
Discernment and evaluation, okay.
And the central professional tension that we're addressing today is, I think it's universal. In a world that is just saturated with information, how do you quickly assess what's valid?
And then what?
And then how do you provide that crucial feedback without just, tearing down morale in the process?
That is the million-dollar question for any leader, really.
It is.
So our mission today, then, is to equip you with a really advanced linguistic toolkit. We're specifically targeting what you might call C2 proficiency to navigate these very complex waters.
Yeah.
We looked across a whole body of sources focusing on these advanced communicating techniques, and they all seem to crystallize the skill set into two essential categories.
Right.
First, analyzing information accurately, which we're calling discernment, and second, delivering critique effectively or evaluation.
And just think about the noise level in professional life right now. I mean, it's deafening.
It really is.
Every single day brings this deluge of data, rumors, theories that sound good.
Plausible theories.
Plausible theories, exactly. And all this pressure to act fast. So precision in your language is no longer a luxury. It's a necessary strategic defense.
A defense. That's an interesting way to put it.
Well, it is. We need to distinguish ourselves, not just by knowing more, but by choosing the perfect word to convey the precise shade of our meaning.
And that leads directly to, I think, the core insight from all the material we reviewed, which is the difference between being, let's say, a lazy cynic and a strategic critic.
Oh, that's a huge distinction. Huge.
Because cynicism is easy, right? It's a default. But critique requires real intellectual rigor and, crucially, intentional language.
It does.
So the big question we're tackling for you today is this. How can we use this specific advanced vocabulary to sharpen our own thinking and ensure that when we deliver judgment or feedback, the outcome is, productive and effective.
And not distracting.
And never, ever distractive.
So we've got 6 foundational concepts that we've pulled from the research, 3 for analysis and 3 for delivery. We're going to unpack them across 2 really comprehensive case studies.
Okay, where do we start?
Let's start on the analysis side. Let's call it the intellectual toolkit for discernment.
The intellectual toolkit, I like it. Okay, let's dive straight into the lexicon for intellectual evaluation. These first 3 words, skepticism, plausible, and substantiate, they feel fundamental.
They are.
For any high-level business, academic, or, strategic discussion where the integrity of the data or the claim is just paramount.
Absolutely. And we have to start at the level of attitude, which is where everything begins.
Okay.
And that word is skepticism. Now, our sources define it very clearly as a healthy questioning attitude.
Healthy, that's the key word.
That's the key word. It is not inherently negative, and it's not based on an assumption of failure. It is simply being, quote, unconvinced.
Just unconvinced.
That's it. And this is probably the most critical nuance that we have to internalize for any kind of advanced professional discourse.
And this is where that required complexity comes in, because we absolutely have to nail the distinction between skepticism and cynicism.
Yeah.
Because I think, in casual conversation, most people use those words interchangeably.
You do, all the time.
But in a high-stakes professional environment, that tiny shift in attitude is, it's everything.
It's everything, absolutely. The research makes it crystal clear. Cynicism assumes a lie.
It assumes a lie.
It assumes bad intent. If you enter a conversation or you review a proposal with cynicism, you have already predetermined the outcome in your own mind.
You've closed the door before it's even been opened.
Exactly. You're operating from a position of intellectual distrust, and frankly, that is a draining and almost always counterproductive way to operate.
Yeah.
It slams the door on potential truth before any evidence is even on the table.
Right. But skepticism, that's the strategic alternative. It's different.
Completely different.
It refuses to act on a mere assumption, but, and this is the key, it acknowledges the possibility of truth.
Yes, it leaves the door open.
It's an intellectual safeguard. It's a mechanism for, due diligence. It's not a personality flaw.
Right.
As a leader or a strategic planner, you are essentially saying, look, I have no reason to disbelieve you, but due to the potential consequences, if we get this wrong, I am obligated to demand proof before I commit.
And we really have to talk about the professional fallout of getting this distinction wrong.
Yeah, let's dig into that.
If you are known as the cynic in your organization, what happens?
People stop coming to you.
People stop bringing you opportunities. They stop bringing you new ideas. They bypass you.
Because they know you'll just shoot it down.
They know you will tear them down simply because you operate from this default position of distrust. It's exhausting for them. But if you cultivate a reputation as a skeptic, something amazing happens. You actually elevate the quality of information that is shared with you.
Oh, that's a fascinating point. So it's like a filter.
It's a quality filter. People around you learn that if they want to get an idea past your desk, they have to come prepared. They have to have done the work to provide the evidence.
So you're not just blocking bad ideas, you're encouraging better prepared ideas.
Precisely. That expectation alone drastically improves the quality of the entire professional discourse around you.
That's a really powerful reframing of that. Skepticism as a tool for elevating organizational standards, not for lowering morale.
It ensures rigor.
It ensures rigor.
It's the gatekeeper that preserves resources, reputation, time, everything.
Okay, so from that attitude of skepticism, let's move to the next word in the discernment toolkit. This one, it sort of highlights the danger that skepticism guards against. The word is plausible. The definition is straightforward enough. It's describing an idea or a statement that just seems reasonable or probable on the surface.
It feels right.
It fits the pattern. It fits the established narrative.
But here's the critical insight, and this is what separates, C2 understanding from just a basic dictionary definition.
Okay.
Plausibility is called, and I love this phrase, the perfect disguise for a rumor.
The perfect disguise for a rumor.
Wow. This is the intellectual trap we constantly face in finance, in tech, in policy, everywhere. Something plausible slips past our mental guards because it aligns perfectly with known trends or market chatter or our own biases.
It uses familiarity to gain unearned credibility.
Unearned credibility.
Yes.
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
I want to spend a bit of time on the psychology of this trap. I mean, why are plausible rumors so dangerous? If someone tells you something completely outrageous, a unicorn just bought Microsoft.
Right.
You instantly discard it. It fails the plausibility test immediately.
It's the believable falsehood that costs us. It's the one that gets through the gate. Think about market bubbles.
Good example.
They often start with a very plausible premise. This new technology is expanding at an incredible rate. We should invest heavily in it.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. That's plausible.
The premise is absolutely plausible.
Yeah.
But the specific valuation of a company within that space, that's often based on pure speculation, not on underlying fundamentals.
Right.
But because the core idea feels so sound, so plausible, the specific unverified claim, the valuation gets swept up and believed by association.
So we're pattern matching.
Exactly. And recognizing something as merely plausible and not yet substantiated, that is the hallmark of high-level discernment. You are recognizing the cognitive shortcut your brain is desperately trying to take.
That's a great connection. We often confuse plausible with probable, and we absolutely confuse it with factual.
All the time.
We need to stop taking action just because a scenario fits neatly into our existing model of the world.
And that strategic delay, that pause, that brings us directly to the third, and I'd say the most actionable verb in this whole set, substantiate.
Okay.
This is a powerful, very formal verb. It means to provide evidence to support or prove the truth of something.
So let's delve deep into the usage nuance here, because this is important for our listeners. Why does advanced professional dialogue default to substantiate instead the simpler word prove?
It's a great question.
I mean, you prove a mathematical theorem which is deterministic. It's either right or it's wrong.
Black and white.
But you substantiate an allegation or a complex theory or a policy justification or, in this case, a rumor.
Right. The source material we looked at suggests that the usage of substantiate automatically adds this layer of formal weight and rigor to the argument because it acknowledges the qualitative nature of the evidence. It suggests that a thorough due diligence process has been performed.
So it's more than just one number.
Much more. If I ask you to prove your sales figures, I'm basically asking for a mathematical calculation, a spreadsheet.
Yeah, right.
But if I ask you to substantiate your claim that the new sales strategy is successful, I am requesting a portfolio of collated, verifiable evidence.
So, like, what would that include?
Customer testimonials, maybe segmented data from 3 different regions, a documented process change. It's a body of evidence, not just a single spreadsheet total.
So it shifts the burden of proof in a way that implies a complex multi-source validation is needed.
Yes.
So if a colleague says, we should launch the new product in Q2, and I turn around and ask, can you substantiate that timeline? I'm not just questioning their confidence. I'm requiring documented, verifiable, maybe even external evidence that solidifies what is, until that point, just a theoretical position.
And this demand for substantiation is precisely where organizational friction often happens.
Okay. The pushback.
The pushback. On one hand, substantiation prevents incredibly costly mistakes. But on the other, demanding too much substantiation for every little thing can lead to analysis paralysis.
Right, where nothing ever gets done.
Nothing gets done. It slows down innovation. So the strategic critic, the person we're trying to become, must know exactly when the evidence reaches the threshold of substantiated enough to move forward.
So it's a judgment call.
It's a judgment call on acceptable risk, informed by the language being used.
Okay, this is a great foundation. Let's take these 3 concepts, skepticism, plausible, and substantiate, and see how they actually play out under extreme pressure.
Perfect.
So we're going into the high-stakes environment of a newsroom. We're using the example of Ray and Alice, 2 journalists debating a major corporate merger lead.
In this case study, it perfectly encapsulates the conflict every professional faces every day. The drive for speed clashing with the absolute necessity of accuracy.
In journalism, that's life or death.
Absolutely. In journalism, speed often means a massive scoop, a career-making story. But an error. An error means ruin.
Okay, so set the scene for us.
The scene opens with Alice presenting this lead. She's excited, she's buzzing, because the source is supposedly a trusted insider at a major investment bank.
So, a good source. On the surface.
A very good source.
Yeah.
And the story itself, that Company A is about to merge with Company B, aligns perfectly with all the recent market chatter.
So to Alice, this lead is immediately highly plausible.
Highly plausible. It feels like a sure thing. It fits the financial narrative she already expects to see.
And Alice is articulating a powerful, plausible case. She's emphasizing the pedigree of the source, the logical trajectory of the market trends. That's why it's so tempting to just run with it.
It is. But Ray, the seasoned editor, approaches the lead with what he explicitly calls a healthy dose of skepticism.
There's our word.
There it is. He sees the plausibility, he acknowledges it. But his default intellectual position is unconvinced.
He's not sold yet.
Not even close. He refuses to commit the organization's reputation based on gut instinct or trend fitting alone.
So this is where we really dissect Ray's process. He doesn't just shut down the conversation.
No, that would be lazy.
He applies linguistic analysis to the source material itself. He asks Alice, read me the source's exact quotes.
And this is so important for you listening. The source used vague, slippery language.
Like what?
Phrases like, imminent discussions are underway, and likely outcomes include a full acquisition.
Imminent and likely.
Analyzing that language is crucial. Imminent and likely are not facts. They are speculative modifiers.
They're qualifiers.
They are linguistic placeholders designed to sound important while carrying zero verifiable data.
They're rumor wrappers.
They are rumor wrappers. That's perfect. Ray instantly recognizes that if they publish this, they are essentially just endorsing speculation and taking on all the associated liability.
And this is the moment where Alice, she's frustrated by the rigor, she's excited, she wants the scoop, and she mislabels Ray's professional caution. She says something like, you're just being cynical, Ray. You never trust anyone. And this happens all the time in fast-moving teams, right? Caution gets mistaken for negativity.
All the time. And Ray has to correct her instantly, using the very language we just established.
What does he say?
He says, no, Alice, I'm practicing skepticism. Cynicism would be assuming they're intentionally lying to manipulate the stock price.
Right, assuming bad intent.
Exactly. He continues, skepticism is simply acknowledging the possibility that they are misinformed, or maybe they're exaggerating, or that the deal simply falls apart before signing. I demand proof before I believe, which is the standard of our profession.
Wow. He just completely resets the entire discussion.
He does. He moves it away from a personal attack on his attitude and puts it back on a shared professional standard of evidence.
That reframing is absolutely key. The stakes are massive here. Reputation, stock market impacts, potential lawsuits.
Everything is on the line.
Publishing speculation risks the organization's entire integrity. And Ray maintains that long game strategy. He says, I'd rather be late and right than first and wrong.
And that line is the embodiment of high-level professional discernment.
So the next immediate step then has to be defining what actually constitutes substantiation.
Exactly. The rubber meets the road. Ray demands proof. He asks Alice, what do we need to move this from a plausible rumor to a substantiated fact that we can actually run with?
It's not enough to poke holes, you have to define the solution.
Right. It now requires a second independent source or some kind of hard documentation.
And the example of the required proof in the case study is perfect because it's so specific and so verifiable.
It is.
Alice asks if getting the CFO's assistant to confirm a specific coded meeting on the schedule would work.
And Ray confirms. He says, if you can get a screen capture of a calendar invite from the CFO's assistant to the CEO of Company A and their legal team, scheduled for the exact date the source mentioned, that would substantiate the rumor.
So why does that specific item work as substantiation? Why a calendar invite?
Because a calendar invite is a verifiable transactional piece of digital evidence.
It's a digital trace.
It's a digital trace. It documents a commitment to an action scheduled to take place at a specific time, involving key liable players. It moves the story from an unverifiable insider tip or whisper to a corroborated, substantiated fact.
It's hard evidence.
It's hard evidence that could be pointed to if the story is ever challenged.
The synthesis of this first section is just so powerful for you, the listener. We are constantly swimming in plausible, exciting rumors.
All day, every day.
Whether they're about organizational restructuring or new market entries or competitor vulnerabilities. And our job is to apply skepticism consistently.
And demand substantiation.
And demand substantiation before we commit resources, or, more importantly, our professional integrity.
And if we connect this all back to the broader C2 objective we started with, this intellectual toolkit is primarily about strategic risk management. By consistently applying skepticism, we ensure that merely plausible information doesn't lead to costly operational or reputational mistakes. We only proceed on what we can formally substantiate.
That makes perfect sense. Rigor in analysis must precede action. But having established the need for this rigorous analysis, the next logical step, and honestly often the more difficult one, is figuring out how we deliver those critical findings. How do you do it without causing institutional damage or destroying the confidence of the people we lead?
Exactly. So now we transition from the analysis of information to the delivery of evaluation. This is where the leadership toolkit comes in.
Okay.
How do you tell someone, especially a highly motivated mentee, that their work isn't good enough?
Yeah. Without crushing them.
Without crushing them.
Yeah.
And for this, we rely on three crucial words: tactful, mitigate, and receptive. These words are specifically designed to help a leader manage strategic risk while preserving the crucial asset of human capital and morale.
Okay, let's start with the relational aspect here. Tactful. The definition is, having sensitivity and skill when dealing with others or difficult issues. This sounds like basic manners.
It sounds simple.
But its professional application is incredibly sophisticated, especially when your goal is to deliver unwelcome news.
And what's fascinating here is how the sources position the word tactful as a strategic discourse marker.
A discourse marker? What do you mean by that?
When a professional, especially a senior one, explicitly uses the word, if they actually say, I need to be tactful here.
They're signposting.
They are signposting. They are signaling to the listener that difficult news is coming. And by doing this, they achieve two things at once.
Okay, what are they?
First, they prepare the listener psychologically for the critique, which softens the blow before it even lands. And second, they demonstrate professional respect.
It's an intentional moment of emotional calibration. By stating, I am being tactful, the speaker is acknowledging the emotional weight of what's about to come. It shifts the discussion from what could feel like an immediate, aggressive attack on the quality of the work, to a shared understanding that what follows is constructive, even if it might sting a little bit initially.
And this directly addresses a common critique issue. If feedback is delivered without tact, what happens?
The defenses go up immediately.
The recipient's defenses immediately go up, and they stop hearing the content. They just hear the attack.
They're just thinking of their rebuttal.
Exactly. Tact ensures the information transfer is actually successful, despite the negative nature of the message itself.
Okay, that's powerful. Now for the solution-oriented word, mitigate. It's defined as making something less severe, serious, or painful. This feels like the calculated language we need for any high-level business discussion.
And just as we saw the powerful difference between prove and substantiate, here we see an even more powerful linguistic shift.
In what way?
In professional critique, the language almost never says, fix the mistake.
No, that sounds accusatory.
It's all about blame. Instead, it says, we need to mitigate the risk.
And the professional impact of that subtle change is immense.
It's night and day.
When you say fix the mistake, the whole conversation centers on blame who made it and how can they reverse it.
It's backward looking.
But when you use mitigate, the language becomes calculated, purely professional, and strategically focused. It reframes the negative outcome as an operational challenge that requires a strategy.
And it shifts the attention entirely away from personal failure.
Right.
It forces a forward-looking perspective. We're not dwelling on the error that was made. We are focused on reducing its future impact. This preserves the mentee's ability to remain solution-oriented.
Which is exactly what a high-performing organization needs from its people.
Exactly.
Okay, finally, we have receptive. This is defined as a willingness to consider or accept new suggestions and ideas. So while tactful and mitigate are for the speaker,
Right, the person giving the feedback.
receptive is aimed squarely at the mentee's psychological state, at their ego.
And being receptive is the necessary precondition for any feedback to actually succeed.
It doesn't work if they're not listening.
It doesn't. If the recipient isn't receptive, the most strategically worded, tactfully delivered critique in the world will simply bounce off of them.
It's a waste of breath.
It's a waste of breath. And the sources highlight that asking someone to be receptive is a strategic move in itself. It directly challenges their intellectual humility.
This moves way beyond simple politeness then.
Way beyond.
When a leader asks for receptivity, they're forcing the individual to separate their personal identity from their professional output.
And that's where the most difficult conversations happen, isn't it? When a person's ego is so wrapped up in the quality of their work.
It feels like a personal attack.
It does. And that separation of ego from work is often the final hurdle in professional maturation. A high-level leader demands receptivity because they understand that protecting one's ego is secondary to protecting the client's investment or the company's reputation or the project's success.
It's a challenge of attitude, not just of intellect.
Perfectly put.
Okay, let's put this leadership toolkit into intensive practice. We have our mentor-mentee scenario with Sarah, the mentor, and Leo, her highly creative mentee.
Right.
Sarah is reviewing Leo's extremely ambitious proposal for a big client launch. And the goal here is that delicate balance. Critique the strategy while preserving the relationship and, the mentee's potential.
So the first thing Sarah has to do is establish good faith. She can't just jump straight into the critique.
No, that would be a disaster.
So she starts with affirmation. She finds something genuinely good and notes that the visuals are certainly striking.
She's buying intellectual capital.
She's buying the capital required for the difficult conversation that she knows is about to follow.
And then comes the strategic deployment of the word tactful.
Yes. She moves to the difficult part, but she frames it not as her personal opinion, but as an organizational imperative.
What does that sound like?
She says something like, Leo, I need to be tactful here because I know how much work went into this, but the logistics are genuinely worrying me, and we have a fiduciary duty to the client.
Oh, that's good. Notice how she uses tactful to signal the critique is coming.
Mm-hmm.
But she immediately anchors that critique to external objective standards.
Right.
Fiduciary duty.
Right. It's not Sarah versus Leo.
It's Leo's strategy versus the client's investment safeguard. It depersonalizes it instantly.
Exactly. And then she gets specific about the flaw. And this detail is critical for us to understand.
Okay.
Leo, kind of blinded by the spectacle of his own idea, has allocated a staggering 80% of the entire budget to a single one-night launch event.
80% on one night.
80%, leaving almost nothing left for the sustained digital campaign that's supposed to follow.
And Leo's assumption is that classic risk assumption we saw earlier. It's the plausible rumor, but applied to strategy.
What's the assumption?
He assumes that viral buzz would carry the campaign indefinitely. It sounds plausible.
It does. We've all seen viral moments.
But it is based on a gamble, not a verifiable multi-stage strategy.
And Sarah immediately identifies that strategic weakness. She says, Leo, this is a gamble, not a strategy. We have created a critical risk of drop-off in engagement by day 3.
Oof.
And then she says, we've had a massive expensive spike, but if we spend everything on day 1, How do we mitigate the risk of absolute silence on day 3?
The language is so precise. She identifies the operational problem not as you made a mistake, but as an unmitigated risk.
Yeah.
This keeps the conversation high level and strategic. She's demanding a risk mitigation plan, not an apology.
Exactly. And the proposed solution is surgical and immediate, and it's centered entirely around that goal of mitigation.
What does she propose?
Sarah suggests cutting the event budget by a specific, justified 30% and reallocating it directly to sustain ad spend. This is the mitigation strategy.
And she frames this action not as a budget reduction, which sounds negative,
Right.
but as an essential move to mitigate the exposure risk and save the overall campaign from a critical point of failure.
But of course, Leo pushes back. He feels the sting of the cut. He complains that the 30% reduction kills the drone light show that he was so proud of.
The emotional attachment.
The ego. And Sarah maintains the focus with professional firmness. She doesn't debate the aesthetics of the drone show.
No.
She says, the light show is spectacular, but this 30% reallocation saves the campaign from exposure failure. Our priority is mitigating the client's risk. The conversation never dips into subjective preferences about drones.
And this leads us to the most difficult part, right? Challenging the mentee's inner resistance.
Yes.
Sarah has to ensure that Leo not only hears the feedback, but that he internalizes it and acts on it without resentment. So she asks him to be receptive to the feedback.
She understands that the barrier here is likely Leo's ego being attached to his cool idea. She needs to break that attachment without breaking his confidence.
So what's her phrasing? It has to be brilliant.
It is. She says, I need you to be receptive to this feedback, Leo. Understand this. This isn't a criticism of your innate creativity or ability. It's a necessary safeguard for the client's substantial investment.
Again, anchoring to the client.
Always. Then she says, we are focused on operational success, not creative credit.
Wow. And she gives him a moment to process that, but then she presses the point to ensure he commits.
She does. She has to lock it in. She says, part of growing in this role, especially at this level, is detaching your ego from the work. So are you receptive to immediately reworking the budget to mitigate this exposure risk? Or should I assign the revision to someone who can apply this lens of caution?
That is a powerful, high-stakes leadership moment.
It is.
She forces Leo to choose his attitude. It's so much more effective than just asking, do you agree with the feedback? Which, just invites endless ego-driven debate.
It does. By challenging his receptivity, she forces him to choose between being stubborn, defending his initial design, or demonstrating professional maturity and choosing to learn.
And Leo, despite the initial pain, which the case study says he admits, saying it's hard to hear his idea is a risk, he makes the correct professional choice.
He does. He acknowledges he got swept up in the spectacle over the sustainability.
And Sarah's synthesis is just perfect. She ensures he retains ownership of the project. She clarifies that the critique was a safeguard for the client's investment, which means he still gets the credit for the eventual successful launch, but now it's a successful launch that had its risk mitigated through strategic intervention.
The takeaway from this whole section is that the leadership toolkit is really about strategic communication architecture.
Architecture, I like that.
You use tactful to open the door for the feedback. You use mitigate to define the necessary action as a strategic imperative. And you use receptive to ensure the mentee processes the critique as a developmental opportunity, not as a personal attack.
Okay, let's zoom out. Let's synthesize the landscape we've charted today. We've covered 6 really powerful C2 level concepts that define advanced professional communication, moving from intellectual rigor all the way to strategic delivery.
So for analyzing information, we established that skepticism is that necessary intellectual attitude.
Right, the healthy questioning.
That keeps us from falling for what is merely plausible, the rumor in disguise.
Yeah.
And it pushes us toward the rigor that's required to actually substantiate our claims with concrete, verifiable evidence.
And then for delivering the evaluation, we learned the importance of being tactful in our delivery, using that word as a discourse marker to signal that difficult news is coming.
Yeah.
While framing our required actions to mitigate identifiable risks, and crucially, demanding that our audience or our mentee remains receptive to the growth opportunity that's being presented by the critique.
And if we look at the whole framework, the central theme that connects everything is the strategic intent behind the word choice.
The intent.
High-level English, what we're calling C2 proficiency, it isn't about vocabulary flashcards. It's about choosing the one word that perfectly captures the precise shade of meaning and intention required to influence the outcome.
So whether you are managing risk in a volatile news environment or you're managing morale in a critical client relationship, the language has to be chosen with calculation.
With absolute calculation.
We've seen that this advanced vocabulary actively shapes our professional reality. It moves us away from vague or emotional or, blame-focused responses.
Yeah, away from all that noise.
And toward calculated strategic communication focused purely on managing consequence and optimizing results.
And that connection between intellectual precision and communication strategy it's utterly intertwined.
You can't separate.
You can't. We're using language not just to report what happened, but to actively influence what will happen. Managing risk, managing morale, and ensuring that due diligence is always prioritized over the tempting speed of speculation.
So, as we wrap up this very detailed deep dive, we want to leave you with this final, powerful thought to apply to your own professional life. If the goal is always to mitigate organizational risk, are we applying that same necessary skepticism to our own motivations and our own assumptions that we demand from other people?
And how often does our own lack of receptivity prevent us from learning the lessons that are hidden within a critique someone is trying to give us?
That's a great question to end on. We encourage you to apply these 6 powerful words: substantiate, plausible, skepticism, tactful, mitigate, receptive to your next internal report, your next challenging presentation, or your next difficult one-on-one conversation.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into professional precision. Keep listening and keep learning.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is, it's pretty simple. We take these really complex sources, research papers, expert notes, strategic analyses, and we boil them down.
We try to extract the essential knowledge. The goal is to give you a shortcut, a direct path to being truly deeply well-informed on a topic.
And today, we are tackling a really crucial stage in language proficiency. We're moving beyond the things we've looked at before.
Right.
We're going past professional conflict, past social etiquette, and we're focusing on what our sources are calling the ultimate mastery. We're talking about the vocabulary of the self.
Exactly. This is a deep dive into the specific words you need to accurately describe and deconstruct your own internal world.
Okay, the internal world.
And just as importantly, your capacity to engage with the external world when it hits you hardest.
Right.
Our sources, they actually frame this as reaching the pinnacle of language.
The pinnacle of language. That's a big claim.
It is. But they argue it's the point where vocabulary stops being just, descriptive. It's not just about naming things anymore.
So it becomes something.
It becomes an analytical tool, a tool for, self-mastery.
So we're not just learning definitions here today. That's not the goal.
No, not at all. We are trying to understand the function of these words, how they work in those really high-stakes moments.
Like in professional life.
In professional life and also in deep creative endeavor. The whole discussion really centers around 2 core psychological processes, and these are, frankly, non-negotiable for success in any field.
Oh, okay, so what are the 2?
So the first theme is resilience.
Resilience, okay.
Basically, how we absorb unexpected shocks, how we recover from what feels like, inevitable massive failure.
Which happens to everyone.
It happens. And the second is introspection.
Introspection.
This is about how we actively seek a really profound understanding of our own thoughts, our motivations, and crucially, our emotional roadblocks. We're giving you the language to handle both the chaos out there
and the confusion in here.
Exactly. The external chaos and the internal confusion.
Okay, so here's the roadmap for today. We're going to tackle 2 crucial vocabulary sets, 6 words in total.
Okay.
First, we'll get into the language of navigating uncertainty and, bouncing back.
The resilience part.
The resilience part. And then we'll shift to the vocabulary of inner realization and those aha moments, the breakthroughs.
And we're going to link them directly to scenarios, really concrete stuff involving finance, leverage, creative honesty.
So by the end of this, you won't just know what these words mean. The idea is you'll understand the specific strategic weight they carry in a conversation.
That's the key, the weight of the word.
All right, let's jump right into the crucible, so to speak. This first set of words, it deals directly with crisis management, with damage control, and with proving you can survive a massive hit. This is what we're calling the language of resilience.
It really is.
And the 3 words we're really going to focus on to start are unprecedented, contingent, and resilient.
And I'll tell you, when you hear these 3 words used correctly in a professional setting, Let's say a board meeting that's discussing a failed acquisition.
Or a sudden market collapse, yeah.
Or a sudden market collapse.
Yeah.
When you hear these words, you know the conversation is pivoted. It's moved away from just describing what happened.
Right. It's not just reporting the news.
No. It's moving into high-level strategic action.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with unprecedented. I mean, my gosh, we all hear this word constantly now, right?
Constantly. It feels a little overused, maybe?
It does. So what is the precise definition we're working with? And maybe more importantly, what's its actual function in a strategic conversation?
Okay, so the definition is simple enough. It just means something never done or known before. It's unique in history. That's it.
One of a kind.
One of a kind. But its functional purpose, and this is what the sources really highlight, is profoundly rhetorical. It's a power move.
How so?
When a leader labels a crisis as unprecedented, they are doing two things at once, instantly. First, they're defining the sheer scale of the event. They're saying, this is bigger than anything we trained for. The old playbooks don't apply.
So it sets the stage. And the second thing?
The second thing is they're creating a rhetorical shield.
A shield?
Yes. By arguing that the market shift, or I don't know, the technological disruption was unprecedented, they are implying that the failure was due to this external novel force.
Something that couldn't have been predicted.
Something that couldn't have been reasonably predicted or prepared for, at least not by traditional means. It subtly, but very effectively, shifts the blame.
It shifts it away from, say, internal negligence or just poor planning.
Exactly. And it places it onto the unique nature of the external environment. It's a very sophisticated way of saying, it's not my fault.
That's a huge insight. So if I'm a manager and I stand up and say, look, the Q3 losses were unprecedented, I'm not just stating a fact about the numbers.
No.
I'm laying the groundwork for my defense. I'm implying, don't blame my strategy, blame the unique chaos of the world right now.
Precisely. You've got it. However, the sources also give a strong caution here.
Which is?
Don't overuse it. If every little problem is unprecedented, the word loses all its impact. It just becomes noise.
It has to actually feel true.
It must truly represent a novel situation. But when it's used correctly, it validates the difficulty of what everyone's going through. It confirms that the current struggle requires a non-standard solution, and that's key.
So it actually opens the door for radical pivots, for trying something completely new.
Yes, that's it. It's a word that grants permission for radical action, because traditional methods are, by definition, insufficient for an unprecedented challenge.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move on to the second word, contingent. This is a word I see a lot in, legal documents, financial agreements. But I get the sense its power is often understated.
It's hugely understated. So its dictionary definition can mean subject to chance, but that's not really how it's used in a strategic context. Its critical functional usage is dependent on certain conditions.
Right. I always think of it as the ultimate conditional word. It's not a soft if, it's not a suggestion. It feels like a structural requirement.
It is a structural requirement. Think about how much stronger it is than just saying if. If I tell you your bonus is contingent on you hitting your sales targets, I'm establishing a formal dependency, a contractual link. It removes any ambiguity, any wiggle room. It means the bonus is absolutely and formally tied to that specific outcome, nothing else.
So the sources, they're stressing that this word forces clarity.
It forces clarity about triggers and dependencies. It's like a logical switch. If A happens, then B is triggered. If A does not happen, B is not, period.
It almost functions like a strategic tripwire. You're setting the terms, you're defining plan A, and at the same time, you're forcing the creation of a definitive plan B.
Yes.
Knowing that plan B is completely contingent on the specific failure of plan A. That gives the person using the word immense control over the terms of engagement.
It does. It moves a discussion from, say, vague speculation, from what-if scenarios into a clear structure in a crisis. If you can stand up and clearly state that action X is contingent upon event Y, you're imposing order onto chaos. And that is a powerful sign of leadership.
Imposing order on chaos. I like that. Okay, and that brings us to the third word, the core concept of this whole section, resilient. Now, why do the sources insist this means more than just being tough? Because those two words feel very similar.
They do, but the difference is fundamental. Toughness often implies rigidity. Think of something that's tough. A diamond is tough. A brick wall is tough.
It's hard to break.
It's hard to break. A tough person resists difficulty until they snap. There's a breaking point. But resilient Resilient means having elasticity.
Elasticity, like a rubber band.
Exactly like a rubber band. It's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It's about absorbing a shock and then bouncing back to your original form, or maybe even a better, stronger form. It's strength combined with flexibility. It's adaptive capacity.
That's a fundamentally different model of strength, isn't it? It's not about being unyielding. It's about being able to absorb the blow without suffering permanent damage.
Permanent deformation. Exactly. A system or a market or a leader who is truly resilient understands that failure is not just possible, it's inevitable. It's going to happen.
So the measure of success isn't avoiding failure.
No. The measure of success is demonstrating the velocity and the completeness of the recovery. How fast and how well did you bounce back? This is the quality that investors, that hiring managers, that everyone looks for when things go wrong.
So they're not asking who resisted the most before breaking.
They're asking who adapted the fastest, who learned from the hit and came back stronger. That's resilience.
Okay, so now we take these three incredibly powerful words, unprecedented, contingent, resilient, and we put them into a truly high-stakes scenario.
Let's do it.
The source gives us a great one. We have Alex, a startup founder, and Diana, the lead investor, and the premise is it's brutal.
It's a nightmare scenario.
Their major product launch, the one everything was riding on, it netted only 300 users.
300.
Against a highly optimistic and probably promised projection of 10,000.
Ouch. Yeah.
So the company is, for all intents and purposes, facing immediate termination. The money runs out next week.
This is a textbook crisis moment, the moment of truth. Alex knows he has to explain this catastrophic failure to Diana, the person who holds all the cards, the person holding the purse strings.
Right. And his initial rhetorical move, it has to be perfect. He has to minimize his personal fault while still validating the gravity of the situation. He can't downplay it.
He can't. And so he leads with that rhetorical shield we just talked about.
He uses unprecedented.
He does. He says something like, Diana, we're facing an unprecedented shift in consumer behavior in this vertical. Our data models, the ones we both agreed on, simply couldn't have predicted this specific rapid pivot away from subscription models.
Look at the language there. Notice the immediate implication. He isn't saying, my team was incompetent or I made a bad call.
No way. He's using unprecedented to suggest the failure was caused by these external forces that judged. They violated the known rules of the game. It's a brilliant defensive move. He's attempting to separate the cause of the failure from his own agency, his own decision-making.
But I have to imagine someone like Diana, a lead investor, she's not just going to accept that easily.
Of course not.
Because if she simply agrees that it was unprecedented, she's essentially validating his passive position. She's letting him off the hook.
And that's where Diana demonstrates high-level communication. She doesn't reject his premise, which would just start an argument. She validates the scale of the problem, but she immediately demands agency from him.
So she might say something like,
She might say, Alex, I agree. The specific combination of forces here might be unprecedented, but strategic risk is never zero. We built cash reserves for these exact moments.
so she's reminding him that planning for the unexpected was part of the plan.
Exactly. And then she lands the pivot. The question isn't whether it was unpredictable. The question is, what happens now?
Wow. So she acknowledges the descriptive weight of unprecedented, but she completely flips the conversation to accountability and, more importantly, to forward action.
And this is where the language of leverage, the word contingent, comes into play.
Because Alex's primary fear, his absolute terror in this moment, must be that she's about to pull the funding.
Absolutely. He's probably expecting the hammer to fall. He might even say it himself, bracing for impact. Something like, I know our remaining funding is technically contingent on us hitting the Q1 targets, and we missed them by a mile. I expect you to pull the plug.
He's acknowledging the original contract. He's bracing for that hard stop that was defined by the original conditional terms.
Right. But Diana, as the professional strategic actor in this scene, she uses contingent not to end the relationship, but to reshape it, to impose even stronger, more immediate leverage.
Okay, so what does she say?
She replies that the original condition hitting 10,000 users is now moot. It's irrelevant. It's in the past. But she quickly, immediately establishes a new set of conditions.
A new deal.
A new deal, on her terms. Her continued support is not based on past performance anymore, but on future potential. She says something incredibly direct.
Like what?
My continued faith and the next funding tranche is contingent on one thing, Alex. You delivering a new, brilliant, and completely viable roadmap, explicitly detailing the pivot, on my desk by Monday morning.
Wow. Just, wow. She traded an old failed condition for a new, immediate, and incredibly high-pressure condition.
She completely weaponized the word contingent.
She really did. She didn't use soft language. No, if you work hard, maybe we can figure it out.
None of that. She established a clear binary transactional boundary. Action X is guaranteed only if specific deliverable Y is met under extreme time pressure. That is the power of contingent in a high-stakes negotiation. It's non-negotiable professional clarity.
So the key takeaway here for anyone listening is that using contingent is just far more professional and far more strategic than making vague promises or threats.
It formalizes conditional help. It creates structure out of thin air.
Okay, so she's created the structure. She's defined the new terms. And now she pivots to the ultimate test, right? The final word, resilience.
Yes, because now she has to figure out if Alex, the person, is actually worth saving. And the sources suggest she evaluates his character based on his ability to recover from this.
She shifts from evaluating the failure itself to evaluating his capacity for adaptation.
Exactly. She might even say something to acknowledge his personal strength. You know, Alex, I invest in people who can survive the failure. The fact that you're sitting here calmly presenting a failure of this scale, it shows me you are surprisingly resilient when your back is against the wall.
So she's validating his personal capacity for recovery, his elasticity, as you called it.
She is. She's signaling that she still believes in him.
But she invests in the person, but she needs the business model to match, right? So how does she use resilient to challenge the structure of the business itself?
That's the final brilliant move. She poses the ultimate test. She states that the market has just demonstrated that the old business model was rigid. It was tough, but it broke.
Okay.
So she challenges him directly. Prove to me that your core business model is resilient enough to absorb this unprecedented shock and pivot completely. We don't just need Alex, the founder, to bounce back. We need the fundamental value proposition of this company to be elastic enough to snap into a new, viable form.
That is a phenomenal distinction. The failure wasn't just a tough moment for the company. It was a stress test that the system itself failed.
Yes.
So now proving resilience means radically changing the system, not just trying harder with the old one.
Exactly. The failure was unprecedented. The required lifeline is contingent. And the ultimate proof required is resilience, the demonstration of elasticity and quick recovery. By using these three words in that order, Diana controls the narrative, validates the problem, and forces the founder into immediate, focused, high-level action.
It just shows how language doesn't just describe a crisis. In the right hands, it defines the terms of survival.
That's it.
That deep analysis of how these words function in a high-pressure exchange is exactly why we do these deep dives. They're not just words, they are strategic tools.
And this leads us perfectly into the second part of our discussion. Because if part one was about recovery from external shocks,
right, from the market hitting you,
part two is about achieving breakthroughs through internal honesty. We need to look inward, using the language of introspection.
Okay, so we're transitioning from the boardroom to the mind. This next vocabulary set feels more personal.
It is. It's critical for personal growth, for creative output, and for solving those deep, confusing internal blockages that hold us all back at some point.
And the three words we're looking at here are introspective, epiphany, and manifest.
These are the words of inner discovery and self-analysis, and the ability to articulate your own mental state with precision. I mean, that's fundamental to effective self-management.
Because if you can't accurately define the nature of your internal struggle,
you can't solve it. You're just treating symptoms.
Okay, let's start with introspective. What makes this word stand out from just, simple reflection? We all reflect. We all think about our day, our past.
Right. And reflection is often passive. It can be just observing your thoughts as they drift by. Introspective, however, defines the active, deliberate, and often quite difficult process of looking inward.
Active and deliberate.
Specifically, examining one's own thoughts and feelings with the aim of essentially psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
It is self-investigation. It's not just noticing you feel a certain way. It is actively seeking the why behind the feeling.
Okay, so let me see if I get this. If I'm lying on the couch thinking, I feel sad today, that's just reflection. But if I'm sitting with a journal, maybe, and writing, I feel sad because I avoided that tough conversation, and I realize that avoidance links back to a childhood fear of confrontation. That is active introspection.
That is perfect. Yes. You're connecting the immediate symptom sadness to the foundational cause, the fear. Introspection requires a certain degree of ruthless honesty.
Less honesty.
Because you are actively trying to uncover the core lie you're telling yourself. or the hidden motivation that's actually driving your behavior.
Yeah.
And the creative scenario we're about to discuss, it hinges entirely on this need for honesty.
Okay, that makes sense. Next, the exciting word, epiphany. We hear this a lot, and it's usually used to just mean a good idea. But the sources, they insist on a much higher bar. What is the real distinction?
The distinction is critical. An ordinary idea or an insight that's often a gradual logical conclusion. You work on a problem, you connect the dots, and you find a solution. An epiphany is different because it must be sudden, striking, and fundamentally transformative.
Transformative.
It is an immediate, often emotionally charged flash of understanding that instantly and permanently changes your entire perspective on something.
So it's the moment when the whole structure of your understanding shifts, and it shifts irrevocably.
Yes.
So if you can go back to your old way of thinking the next day, it probably wasn't a true epiphany.
Correct. The sources really emphasize this transformational quality. It's not just about a single puzzle piece finally fitting into place. It's about realizing you were building the wrong puzzle all along and then suddenly seeing the true picture for the first time.
And these are rare.
True epiphanies are very rare, but they are disproportionately powerful in driving creative and personal breakthroughs when they do happen.
Okay. And finally, manifest. This is a versatile word, but in this specific context of inner discovery, how does it connect our internal state to the observable external world?
We're really focusing on the verb form here. To display or show a quality or a feeling through one's acts or appearance.
Okay.
It describes the process by which an unseen emotional or mental condition becomes externally visible. It can be physical, it can be behavioral, it can be creative. The source example is perfect. Stress often manifests as physical pain.
Right. So the internal invisible state, the stress, the anxiety, has to create an external physical symptom. A headache, back pain, or writer's block. The internal is made external.
Exactly. Yeah. It explains the link between the inner psychological reality and the outer observable reality. If you have, say, a deep-seated belief about scarcity, about never having enough, those beliefs will manifest themselves in your professional choices. Maybe you're afraid to invest in growth, or you hoard resources. The belief manifests as a behavior.
So if you have creative dishonesty, like we were just talking about,
That dishonesty manifests as a creative block. It is the essential connection point between mind and matter, the internal cause and the external effect.
that framework internal cause manifesting as an external symptom, that is immediately useful for diagnosis, for figuring out what's really wrong.
It is.
Okay, let's see how these three terms, introspective, epiphany, and manifest, unlock a personal and creative breakthrough in our next scenario. All right, the scenario here involves two writers, Julian and Claire, and the setup is that Claire has just finally finished a manuscript she's been struggling with intensely for over a year.
Long time.
A long time. But it's clear she's achieved some kind of breakthrough that goes way beyond just, typing the end.
Right. And Claire starts by describing that period of blockage. She says it required intense self-examination. She wasn't just struggling with, the prose or the plot.
It was deeper than that.
Much deeper. She was stuck because her main character felt fundamentally inert, fake. And she said she was forced into a deeply introspective mood to figure out why.
What kind of questions was she asking herself that would qualify this as deep introspection, not just regular frustration?
Well, she wasn't asking, how do I fix this scene? Or, that was a better word here.
Right, the surface level stuff.
No, she was asking, why does this character feel false to me? And what emotional truth am I deliberately avoiding in my own life that is preventing this character from feeling real?
Wow, that's a dangerous question to ask yourself.
It is, and the source material explains that she had this realization. The flatness of her protagonist, it stemmed directly from her own fear of putting a painful, unvarnished personal truth on the page.
So the crucial realization, which she got to through this painful introspection, was that she was basically writing a story she thought an agent would want. A commercially viable archetype.
Instead of the true, messy, authentic story that she needed to write, she was, in effect, lying to herself about her own creative mission.
And that gets back to what you said earlier. That is the necessity of honesty for effective introspection. You have to be willing to confront the internal evasion.
You have to. She had to be introspective enough to admit the dishonesty. The character was flat because Claire was hiding her own vulnerability behind a safe, predictable narrative structure.
In the moment she stopped evading that internal truth, the breakthrough was imminent. Which brings us, of course, to the epiphany. This wasn't a gradual fix, was it? It was instantaneous.
Absolutely not gradual. The source describes it as hitting her during a mindless walk. The classic moment where the subconscious breaks through after intense conscious effort.
It's never when you're staring at the screen.
Never. And the realization was sudden and overwhelming. The epiphany was this. The protagonist wasn't a hero who needed to overcome external challenges. He was a coward. He was consumed by a crippling, pathetic fear, and that fear was the true dramatic engine of the entire story.
That is genuinely transformative. I mean, that doesn't just change the ending.
No.
It redefines the very identity of the main character. It means every single chapter that came before it had to be reread and completely recontextualized in light of this new truth.
It completely shifted the narrative perspective from the ground up.
Yeah.
And Julian, her friend, hearing this, he immediately recognizes the weight of that realization. He says something like, the best work, the most authentic work, it almost always comes immediately after an epiphany like that.
Why?
Because the creative mechanism you're writing has finally aligned with your genuine personal truth. The friction is gone.
And once that truth is accepted, the resistance vanishes. Which brings us to our last word, manifestation.
That's right. Claire explains that once she accepted the truth, that the protagonist's core was his cowardice, the story finally manifested exactly as it was supposed to be.
The internal vision became external reality.
The internal vision, once it was aligned with that ruthless honesty we talked about, it immediately translated into the external, tangible reality of the finished manuscript. The writing just flowed because the inner block was finally gone.
And then Julian, he takes this concept and he applies it back to the general creative struggle. He reinforces that internal-external link.
He does. He connects the feeling of anxiety to the physical reality of being stuck.
What does he say?
He says, anxiety manifests as writer's block, doesn't it? And that statement, it's really profound when you think about it.
Let's spend a moment on that. If anxiety manifests as writer's block, it means that trying to treat the block with external solutions, it's never going to work.
Right.
Things like making a better outline or setting stricter deadlines, you're treating the symptom, not the cause.
That's the key implication. You have to address the anxiety first. If the symptom, the block, is merely the manifestation of a deeper internal cause, you have to go back to step one. You have to use introspection to diagnose the root anxiety.
So you have to ask, how did the block manifest? Was it endless procrastination?
Or was it excessive over-editing? Tinkering with the same sentence for hours.
Or maybe starting 5 different projects but never finishing any of them.
All of those are external, observable symptoms, but the cause remains internal. Recognizing this connection, using the language of manifestation, it allows for a precise diagnosis and hopefully an effective self-correction.
So the entire arc of a creative breakthrough is this. The honesty that is required by introspection leads to the clarifying shock of the epiphany, which then allows the internal truth to smoothly manifest into the finished external product.
It's a perfect application of this vocabulary set.
It really is.
And it demonstrates that while the vocabulary of resilience deals with adaptation to the outside world, the vocabulary's introspection deals with aligning your internal world so you can actually perform that adaptation.
Ah, that's the connection.
Yeah.
You can't adapt your business model, you can't be resilient.
If you are still lying to yourself about the underlying fault in the first place, which requires introspection.
Okay, so we've spent a good amount of time analyzing these two distinct but equally powerful sets of vocabulary. In part one, we used unprecedented, contingent, and resilient to navigate a financial crisis and, apply leverage.
The external world.
And then in part two, we used introspective, epiphany, and manifest to achieve creative honesty and a breakthrough. The internal world.
That's right. But the sources, they insist that the true pinnacle of language proficiency isn't reached by just knowing these two sets separately.
It's about how they connect.
It's about understanding how they interact and how they reinforce each other. This is the synthesis moment.
Okay, so let's discuss that interaction. If resilience is about bouncing back from external shocks, and introspection is about internal honesty, where is the direct overlap?
The overlap is found in diagnosis. It's all about diagnosis.
Go on.
Think back to Diane and Alex in that financial scenario. She demanded a resilient outcome, right? She demanded a pivot.
Yes, by Monday morning.
By Monday morning. But Alex couldn't possibly deliver a brilliant new roadmap, which would be the manifestation of his resilience, if he hadn't first been introspective enough to determine the real reason the product failed.
Ah, right.
Was the failure truly because of unprecedented external chaos, as he initially claimed? Or Was it because his own internal bias against customer feedback had manifested as a poor product design?
So the introspection has to happen before the resilience can be activated correctly.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just attempting a resilient recovery, but it's based on a completely false diagnosis of the problem.
Exactly. Resilience without introspection leads to you just repeating the same mistake, but faster and with more energy. You have to use the precision of introspection to find the root cause. You have to wait for the epiphany that clarifies the true path forward. And only then can you effectively demonstrate the required resilience by executing that pivot.
This moves way beyond just learning vocabulary. This is a framework for problem solving. It reinforces that central theme from the source material. That true proficiency is about understanding the weight of the word, its implications, its context, and its power to shape action and define reality.
Let's just think about the weight of each word one last time in this integrated context. The shock from the outside world is unprecedented.
Okay.
The internal response to that shock must be introspective honesty. That honesty leads to the epiphany, the flash of insight about the path forward.
And that clarity allows you to establish the necessary contingent boundaries for the recovery effort, the new terms.
Exactly. And finally, the successful recovery has to manifest externally, which is what proves the resilience of the system or the person. All 6 words working together.
Using these words, it signals a kind of fundamental intellectual mastery, doesn't it? You're not just talking around a problem anymore.
No, you are speaking directly to its causality, its required conditions, and its deep psychological roots. And that capability, that's what elevates your communication from just being functional to being truly strategic.
And I would think that mastering this precise language, it also shields you from intellectual laziness.
How so?
Well, it forces you to distinguish between a minor problem and an unprecedented one. It forces you to distinguish between just passively thinking and active introspection.
Right, and between a small adjustment and a fundamental epiphany.
Exactly. It demands precision in your own thinking. #tag B. Key takeaways for the learner. So let's synthesize these 6 powerful words as the ultimate toolkit. The toolkit for high-level communication and self-management. This is the concise summary of what we've hopefully internalized today.
Okay, so first, we learned how to define the scale and novelty of a challenge, and how to rhetorically manage accountability using the word unprecedented.
Second, we now understand the strategic power of conditionality, how to set firm transactional boundaries and clarify dependencies in a really professional way using contingent.
Third, we defined what effective recovery really means, emphasizing that adaptive strength of flexibility and elasticity with the word resilient.
And fourth, we have the tool for honest self-analysis, for actively seeking the root causes of our internal blocks, which is the very definition of being introspective.
Fifth, we can now distinguish, with precision, a minor insight from a major transformative perception-shifting realization with the word epiphany.
And finally, sixth, we can connect our inner psychological state, our anxieties, our beliefs, our hidden truths, to the observable external actions, symptoms, or outcomes using the verb manifest.
And these are not just definitions to go and memorize for a test. They are strategic tools for navigating the highest levels of professional pressure and personal development.
By internalizing the weight of these 6 words,
you gain the ability to articulate complexity with precision, to control narratives when you're in a crisis, and to diagnose your own capacity for growth.
That truly sounds like language mastery. The ability to define the world in a way that allows you to control your response to it.
That's what it is. The journey through this source material has shown that high-level communication is, at its core, about structuring chaos, both the chaos outside and the chaos inside. #outro.
We've reached the end of this deep dive. We've explored what our sources are calling the pinnacle of language usage, moving from establishing financial leverage all the way to achieving profound creative honesty.
And the sources, they leave us with a final, holistic piece of encouragement. It really summarizes the path to continuous self-mastery using the very words we've discussed.
What is it?
Mastery in any domain is achieved by being resilient in your learning, that capacity to bounce back from your mistakes, by staying deeply introspective about why those mistakes occurred in the first place, and by remaining open enough to receive those sudden epiphanies that radically shift your course toward success.
That provides a complete blueprint, doesn't it? You have to be resilient enough to face the facts. introspective enough to define the internal truth of the matter.
Yes.
And then open to that sudden transformative realization that allows you to pivot effectively. It integrates the key words into a dynamic model of growth.
It frames the entire process of continuous improvement. Using the very tools we just spent all this time discussing, it stops being academic theory.
And it becomes a functional operating system for the self.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay. Now for our final provocative thought for you to chew on this week. We want you to reflect on a major setback you have faced in the last year or so. And don't just recall the event. We want you to analyze your response to it. First question. Did you use the word unprecedented to describe the scale of the difficulty, either to yourself or to others? And looking back now, was that justification truly valid?
And further, analyze the moment you finally found the solution or the path forward. Did that solution come from gradual, grinding effort, or was there a sudden transformative epiphany that unlocked everything for you in an instant?
And finally, how did your chosen strategy, your solution, manifest itself in the final result? What was the observable outcome of that internal shift?
Go back and apply this precise, demanding vocabulary to that real-world reflection. Analyze your own crisis rhetoric, define the conditions you imposed on yourself or others, and try to pinpoint that moment of clarifying truth.
That application, that's the final step in turning these definitions into true mastery.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. We look forward to exploring the core of complex knowledge with you next time.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is a little different. We're not hunting for new data.
No, not at all. We're looking for precision.
Exactly. Surgical precision with the vocabulary we already have. We are diving deep into the specific language needed to navigate some of the most, challenging professional terrain there is.
The ethical gray areas.
The ethical gray areas and how to extract a path forward from them.
And this is really about moving beyond just describing a situation and into, truly analyzing it.
Mm-hmm.
The source material you pulled together for this is fantastic because it perfectly captures this shift we're all facing, I think, in our professional lives.
Which is?
The shift from asking the technical question, can we build this? Can we execute on this strategy? To the much, much harder moral and strategic question.
Should we do this?
Should we do this?
Yeah.
And maybe even more importantly, what does doing this actually cost us in the long run?
That is the core mission. So we've pulled out 6 essential terms, words that really govern everything from professional survival and adaptation to moral consequence.
These are the tools that force us to weigh competing values.
Right, to balance those immediate, very practical needs.
Like making payroll.
Like making payroll against those foundational moral boundaries.
And maintaining your integrity, your reputation, the things that are much harder to measure on a spreadsheet.
So true.
And we could organize these 6 concepts into 2, I think, very clear and distinct toolkits.
Okay, let's lay them out.
The first 3 define what we can call the language of adaptation and survival. They're all about the constant pressure of change and, the evolution that's required to just stay relevant.
Okay, adaptation and survival. And the second set?
The second 3, they take us into the deep water of accountability.
Much heavier.
Much heavier. These are the terms we need to dissect morality, integrity, and the full crushing weight of consequences.
So the goal for you, listening right now, is to move beyond using soft, kind of vague language and start employing a vocabulary that is genuinely precise.
Because that precision is power. It really is. Mm. You shouldn't just be saying, we changed our business plan.
Yeah.
You should be able to articulate the strategic pivot. You shouldn't be talking about a bad result of a decision.
What should you be talking about?
You need to be analyzing the complex systemic ramification. That shift in language, that's the difference between a shallow conversation and one that can actually guide a really difficult decision.
Okay, so let's get into it. Where do we start?
We start with the fundamental anxiety of the modern professional.
The first set of words. This is all about the relentless march of, progress, technology, competition, you name it.
They articulate the mechanics of how you maintain relevance in a world that, frankly, seems designed to render you unnecessary.
That's a cheerful thought.
It is, but it's the reality. And we have to begin with the central fear that drives so much of this, the one that causes strategic paralysis.
And that word is obsolete.
Obsolete. The sources define it very simply.
Yes.
No longer produced or used, usually because it has been replaced by something demonstrably faster, cheaper, or, just more effective.
And historically, this word applied to things, to objects.
Exactly. An 8-track tape.
Yeah.
A rotary phone. A telegraph machine. They're just things that are no longer useful.
But you pointed out earlier, the word itself has evolved. It's undergone this shift.
A huge shift. It's now become an existential descriptor. We apply it to people, to professional skill sets, to entire business models, even to whole industries.
So what's the real difference between an obsolete object, like my old MP3 player, and an obsolete professional? The object doesn't feel dread.
That's the core of it. The difference lies in the psychological and strategic implications. An obsolete object, it just sits in a drawer. You forget about it.
Right.
An obsolete professional or an obsolete company. That's a person whose primary source of value, the thing they built their career on, has been commodified or automated away.
It's no longer just about falling behind the curve.
No, it's the specific dread of knowing that the 10,000 hours you spent mastering a complex skill,
Let's say detailed architectural drafting or complex manual accounting.
or even database administration from 10 years ago. All of that expertise can now be executed by a machine learning model in milliseconds.
Or, just as likely, by a specialized, much lower cost firm on the other side of the world.
Precisely. It is the fear that your hard-won expertise has become totally and utterly irrelevant.
And the sources we looked at suggest something fascinating here. They say the psychological journey of facing your own obsolescence, it often mirrors the 5 stages of grief.
I can absolutely see that. You start with denial.
No, this new technology, it can't really replicate my experience, my human touch.
Then you move to anger. They're destroying the craft. They don't value quality anymore.
Followed by bargaining, depression, and then finally, hopefully.
You arrive at acceptance. And that's the crucial part, because acceptance is the necessary precursor to strategy. You can't plan a future until you accept the reality of the present.
Okay, so if obsolescence is this huge structural threat, this meteor heading our way, we need to talk about the counterforce.
The thing that fights back.
Yes. What is the uniquely human trait that resists this algorithmic march to irrelevance?
And that brings us perfectly to our second term for this section, ingenuity.
Ingenuity. It's defined as the quality of being clever, original, and inventive.
And I think it's critical to point out that ingenuity is not the same thing as just working hard.
Or being efficient.
Or even having raw intelligence. A computer is incredibly intelligent and brutally efficient, but it is not, on its own, inherently ingenious.
That's a fantastic distinction. So what is it then?
Ingenuity is about seeing connections that shouldn't exist. It's about applying old knowledge to a brand new problem in a completely novel way.
Or, and I think this is the most important part,
Go on.
it's about identifying the problems that the existing super efficient system cannot even see.
Yes, that's it. When we talk about professional survival, ingenuity is what allows you to look at the machine that just replaced 80% of your job.
And not panic.
And not panic, but to calmly ask, okay, what is the 20% it fundamentally cannot do? And how can I amplify my entire focus right there?
It's the strategic application of originality. It's about finding the human-shaped hole in the automation.
Beautifully put.
So let's follow the logic. We accept that a key part of our job is heading toward obsolescence. We then employ our ingenuity to define a new way to create value.
Right.
That strategic leap requires our third and final term for this section, pivot.
Pivot. It's a classic high-level business term, but it gets misused all the time.
People think it just means change.
They do, but it's much more specific. The sources are very clear on this. A pivot means to fundamentally change your direction or your strategy while, and this is the absolute core of the definition,
Wow.
keeping one foot grounded in your existing knowledge or skills.
Okay, I want to challenge that for a second because that's where the real difficulty is. If a company is in financial distress because its core market is dying, how realistic is it to keep one foot grounded? Isn't this often presented as this neat, clean maneuver when the reality is the ground is shaking and they might have to lay off 70% of the team before the pivot can even start?
That's a vital distinction. You're right. A pivot is not clean. It's inherently destabilizing. It requires capital to execute, whether that's financial capital, intellectual capital, or reputational capital.
So it's not just quitting.
Absolutely not. If you're an architect and you just quit drafting entirely and decide to become a baker, that's not a pivot.
That's a clean break, a career change.
It's a clean break. A pivot is strategic adaptation. It means realizing that the market no longer values how you deliver your service.
For instance, the manual technical calculations.
Exactly. But it still deeply values why you deliver it.
The conceptualization of a functional, beautiful building, the human-centric design.
So the retained asset, that grounded foot you mentioned, it has to be your deep institutional understanding of the problem space, even if all the tools for solving it have changed.
So the pivot, is the shift in the value proposition. It's changing what you charge for.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
It's moving from charging for labor to charging for judgment.
I like that. Labor to judgment.
And the sources show this over and over. Successful pivots are defined by this precise retention of institutional knowledge. The pivot acknowledges the threat of obsolescence.
It then employs ingenuity to redefine the human role.
And implements a strategic shift, the pivot, that preserves the essential hard-won expertise while jettisoning the parts that have been commodified.
This all sounds great in theory, very clean,
Okay.
but let's see how brutal this actually looks in the real world.
Fair enough. Our first case study drops us right into a high-pressure situation, a dialogue between two seasoned architects, Marcus and Julia.
And this isn't some abstract 5 years from now tech threat they're debating.
No, this is an immediate, quantifiable danger to their livelihood. It's about disruptive AI, and it's happening right now.
Marcus's panic is so understandable because the threat isn't vague, it's numerical, it's precise.
What's the inciting fact?
The new AI software they're testing just generated a complete complex structural schematic, what they call a building information model, or a BIM analysis.
Which is the super detailed 3D model with all the material specs, structural data, everything.
Everything. The AI did it in 3 seconds.
3 seconds. And how long would that take a human?
As Marcus laments, this is a task that would take a skilled human architect 3 full days of focused labor.
Wow.
3 days of cross-checking engineering specs, manually calculating load-bearing capacity, coordinating materials lists, all of that.
So if a task that represented, maybe 30% of their billable hours,
Can now be done instantly for pennies.
then that portion of their business has literally overnight become obsolete.
And Marcus's reaction to this is completely fatalistic. He sees all their accumulated knowledge as a sunk cost. It's worthless now.
He sees the situation as a zero-sum competition with the machine.
He uses this absolutely devastating analogy. He says they are dinosaurs waiting for the meteor.
And his core conflict point is so pragmatic it's painful.
It is. He says clients don't pay for soul or inspiration anymore. They pay for speed and certainty.
The market is rewarding ruthless efficiency. And human technical skill cannot possibly compete with a 3-second generation time.
He sees only the loss of their former identity as these meticulous technical drafters. The craft is gone.
So Marcus is laser focused on what they are losing.
But Julia, she recognizes the same threat of obsolescence, but her focus shifts entirely.
She focuses on what they retain.
Yes, and this is her brilliant application of ingenuity.
So she doesn't deny the facts. She doesn't argue with the 3-second number.
Not at all. She validates his fear. She says, "You're right, the machine is a better technician than we will ever be again."
But then she makes the turn.
She insists that while the tools change, the fundamental need for human judgment remains constant. The AI is a calculating machine. It performs the technical can.
It answers, can we do this?
Right, but it can't answer, should we do this?
And her analysis of that unique human factor is just brilliant.
It really is. She says the software can calculate the precise distribution of stress across a foundation, down to the kilopascal. But it lacks any of the qualitative judgment needed to understand how the light hits the atrium at 4 p.m. in February.
Or how this particular layout will make a kindergarten class feel on a rainy day.
Exactly. Those nuanced human factors, biophilia, psychology, long-term maintenance practicality, the emotional impact of a space, those are the exclusive domains of human ingenuity.
So Julia's argument is that the true expertise they spent decades acquiring wasn't just in the doing of the drafting.
It was in the interpretation and the direction of the final result.
It's the difference between a musician who can perfectly read sheet music and an orchestra conductor who determines the emotion, the tempo, the entire feel of the performance.
That's a perfect analogy, and this insight is what directly facilitates their strategic redirection, their pivot.
So since they can no longer compete on the basis of technical drafting,
They have to fundamentally change their value proposition. They have to move the center of their business model away from that skill.
and the analysis of this pivot is the key takeaway here. They are transitioning from selling themselves as builders, the hands-on executors who produce the plans.
But becoming curators.
Curators. That's such a profound shift up the value chain.
So what does that mean in practical terms? What does a curator architect do?
Well, as a curator, they are now outsourcing the grunt work, the 3-day drafting job that's now done in 3 seconds, to the AI.
So they're not fighting the AI.
They're managing it. Their billable hours now shift entirely to things the AI can't do.
Concept development, high-level client management, navigating complex regulatory environments.
And, critically, quality control and oversight of the AI's output. They become the expert arbiters of the machine's work.
So their retained asset, their grounded foot, is their 20 years of architectural knowledge.
Exactly. They know precisely where the AI might make a subtle, undetectable, but potentially fatal error. And they know how to prompt the AI, how to guide it to solve the nuanced human problem, not just the technical one.
So the pivot changes everything. Their marketing materials, their fee structure.
All of it. They stop charging high hourly rates for detailed drafting, and they start charging very high consulting fees for conceptualizing and guaranteeing the final vision.
And Marcus's initial skepticism is the perfect stand-in for the listener's own fear. He asks, so we just embrace the thing that's trying to replace us?
And Julia's answer is the critical insight of this whole case study. She says that clinging to the old methods, clinging to the manual drafting out of nostalgia or pride, is the one thing that guarantees their obsolescence.
By applying their ingenuity to guiding the disruptor, they move from being the machine's competitor
to being its master.
They ensure that the speed of the machine is leveraged to achieve a result that only human judgment could define in the first place.
Julia summarizes it perfectly at the end. She tells him, it's not dying, Marcus. It's evolving.
So the solution to the obsolescence of the skill
is the ingenuity to define the pivot in the business model.
A powerful, powerful example.
That case study really illustrates the language of professional survival. But now we have to turn to the other side of the coin.
The language of accountability.
Exactly. If the first set of words defines how we adapt and survive,
this next set defines should we adapt in a way that might compromise our foundational values.
We're moving from a conversation about strategy to a conversation about integrity.
It's a transition from adaptation, how to stay in business, to the far heavier, murkier terrain of navigating ethical choices, determining moral boundaries, and accepting the full weight of the consequences of those choices.
And we begin this second set with the word that so often serves as the justification, or maybe the excuse, for making the morally difficult choice.
And that word is pragmatic.
Pragmatic. The definition is simple. Dealing with things sensibly and realistically based on practical rather than theoretical considerations.
In a negotiation or in a boardroom, this is the voice of immediate necessity. Let's be pragmatic here.
And that is exactly why it can be so dangerous in ethical discussions.
How so?
When someone says, we must be pragmatic, what they're really doing is prioritizing tangible, immediate outcomes.
Like making the quarterly earnings report look good?
Or keeping a key investor happy, or just making payroll this month. They're prioritizing those things over potentially abstract, long-term moral principles.
So it functions as this kind of intellectual mechanism for creating what you called a false dichotomy.
Precisely. By labeling the painful but immediate choice as the pragmatic one, the speaker effectively dismisses all other alternatives as unrealistic, idealistic, or naive.
It's a way of shutting down the conversation about ethics by reframing it as a conversation about survival.
It is. We have to ask ourselves, when does being pragmatic stop being a necessary survival strategy and start becoming, for lack of a better term, intellectual cowardice?
That's a tough question. Is there a line?
The source material implies that the critical inflection point is when the perceived necessity requires you to fundamentally violate a stated organizational value for a purely immediate gain.
So if your company's mission is about environmental stewardship, but pragmatism requires you to dump waste illegally to save money,
then pragmatism has crossed the line from a realistic survival tactic to a simple ethical cop-out. It's just a fancy word for doing the wrong thing because it's easier.
Okay, so if pragmatism defines the justification for the compromise, our next word defines the risk of getting involved at all.
The risk of association. And that word is complicit.
Complicit. Now, this is a heavy word.
A very heavy word. The legal definition is being involved with others in an illegal activity or wrongdoing.
But in a professional context, it's broader than that.
Much broader. We have to extend that definition beyond just illegal acts to include profound moral or ethical wrongdoing, especially when we're talking about environmental or social harm.
And the critical weight of this term, what makes it so powerful, is that it implies shared responsibility.
Yes. You don't have to be the one pulling the lever to be complicit.
If you knowingly lend your support, your silence, and this is the most critical part,
your brand's legitimacy.
Yes, if you lend your legitimacy to the bad act, You are implicated. You share in the guilt.
Think of it as reputation laundering. It's a very real thing.
Explain that.
Okay, so if an organization is known for, say, environmental degradation, but it manages to secure a research partnership with a highly respected, pristine university, that university, even if the science it's doing is completely pure and unrelated, becomes complicit.
Our work is good.
Because their association provides a veneer of respectability to the bad actor. They're passively enabling the ongoing misconduct by giving the wrongdoer cover and moral legitimacy.
So the very act of association is the problem.
The sources suggest that the moment you accept value, whether that's money, prestige, or even just association from a wrongdoing organization, you are accepting a share of the liability for their actions, past, present, and future.
The danger of complicity, then, is that it turns a passive act, like signing a contract,
into an active form of moral entanglement.
And that entanglement leads directly and often disastrously to our final term.
Ramification.
A ramification is defined as a complex or unwelcome consequence of an action or event.
And this might be the most important word in the entire ethical toolkit, because it is the one that forces you to project into the future.
I want to spend a moment here really distinguishing this clearly. We use words like consequence or result all the time. Why is ramification so much heavier, so much more significant?
It's a great question. A result is singular. It's immediate. And it's often expected. You invest money in a stock, the result is either a profit or a loss. It's a first-order effect.
Simple cause and effect.
Simple cause and effect. A ramification is systemic. It's a chain reaction, often unforeseen, that ripples outwards.
It's the second, third, and fourth order effects.
Exactly. It's the spreading ripple effect, usually negative, that poisons other seemingly unrelated aspects of the system.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. The immediate result of cutting funding for your company's compliance division might be a cost saving of $2 million on this quarter's P&L statement.
Which looks great to the shareholders. A pragmatic choice.
A very pragmatic choice. But the ramification of that choice could be a crippling multi-year federal investigation a year later.
Which then leads to a total loss of consumer trust.
Which then leads to an inability to hire top talent because no one wants to work for you.
Which eventually leads to the complete collapse of shareholder value, wiping out far more than the $2 million you saved.
That is the essence of it. Thinking in terms of ramifications requires analytical complexity. It demands that a decision-maker project, not just the immediate result, but all the downstream effects that ripple through reputation, talent pipelines, and regulatory relationships.
So the ability to articulate and track potential ramifications is the hallmark of a sophisticated ethical leader.
Absolutely. It's the difference between playing checkers and playing chess.
Let's see, these three terms, pragmatic, complicit, and ramification, clash in the most difficult environment imaginable.
A fight for financial survival.
Our final case study places us in a tense boardroom. We have Elias and Nadia. They run a small but highly respected materials research lab.
And their focus is on sustainable energy solutions. So their mission is very clear. Very moral.
But they're desperate for funding, and they've just received a massive contract offer from a corporation. Let's just call them Omnicorp.
And Omnicorp is known globally for its environmental negligence, repeated oil spills, lobbying against green legislation, the works.
So the stakes here are immense. And Elias, who's the lead scientist, he takes the immediate financial view.
And he roots his entire argument in the language of pragmatism.
His argument is meticulously constructed to justify taking this dirty money.
What's his case?
The funding is huge. It secures their payroll for 2 full years. It allows them to expand, hire 8 new postdoctoral researchers, and continue their work on what he calls truly good science.
Which in this case is a new material that could revolutionize solar panel efficiency.
Right. So his justification for taking the Omnicorp money is pure pragmatism. He immediately creates that false dichotomy we talked about.
What's the choice he presents?
He says, our choice is this. We reject the money, and we have to lay off half of our existing team and drastically slow down our solar research.
And then he puts the knife in.
He asks Nadia, very pointedly, is laying off brilliant people and halting sustainable innovation truly the more moral choice here?
Oof. That is a powerful framing.
It is. Elias is effectively saying that the tangible, measurable, good-saving jobs furthering science today outweighs the abstract moral taint of where the funds are coming from.
He's arguing that by channeling Omnicorp's bad money into good science, they're actually creating a net positive for the world.
A kind of ethical arbitrage.
Exactly. But Nadia counters by shifting the conversation entirely. She moves it away from short-term results and focuses squarely on long-term accountability.
And she brings in the devastating accusation of being complicit.
How does she frame it?
Nadia dissects the mechanism of greenwashing perfectly. She explains that Omnicorp isn't paying for their solar research results. They don't care about that.
What are they paying for?
They're paying for the association, for the photo op. That Omnicorp logo, placed right next to the respected name of their lab, instantly buys Omnicorp a public relations shield.
And that's where the complicity is defined.
Yes. Nadia argues that by signing the contract, they are actively participating in Omnicorp's corporate strategy, a strategy of using scientific partnerships to distract from their primary business.
Which is ongoing environmental degradation.
So she says, if we take this money, we become complicit in every future oil spill, every regulation they violate, because our good name is now providing Omnicorp with cover.
We are accepting value in exchange for our moral silence.
And she emphasizes the gravity of that trade. They aren't just taking a check, they're selling their moral capital.
Which, for a research institution, is their foundational currency.
It's everything. She says they're essentially telling the world that their integrity has a price tag, and Omnicorp was rich enough to meet it.
And then, crucially, Nadia shifts the focus entirely away from the immediate cash infusion
to the complex systemic ramifications.
She says to Elias, "You're focused on the result cash today. I'm focused on the ramifications, the long-term irreversible consequences."
And what are those ramifications specifically? Because this is where the argument gets really sharp.
They are systemic. First, the loss of credibility.
Right. Nadia explains that other, cleaner funding sources, like major federal science grants or partnerships with prestigious universities, they all operate on stringent ethical review boards.
The minute they are publicly funded by a known offender like Omnicorp,
those reputable doors will slam shut. They might gain $10 million today, but they permanently lose access to $100 million in future cleaner opportunities.
Okay, that's ramification number one. What's number two?
The talent drain. Top-tier researchers, especially young idealists who are focused on sustainability, will not want to associate their careers with a lab that has publicly sold out to a climate offender.
So they risk losing their best existing talent, and they'll fail to recruit the most promising young minds coming out of grad school.
And third, there's internal cultural collapse.
What does she mean by that?
By accepting the money, they send a signal to their entire team that financial expediency trumps their foundational mission.
The very moral mission that attracted those researchers in the first place is now tainted.
And that leads to cynicism, disengagement, and reduced performance. The soul of the organization is compromised.
This scenario is just brutal because it exposes that core tension so perfectly.
Elias is prioritizing saving measurable jobs today, and he's using a pragmatic lens to do it.
While Nadia is prioritizing preserving their abstract reputation tomorrow through the lens of complicity and ramification.
It really captures the essence of that lesser of two evils problem.
It does. Elias uses pragmatism to justify the action, believing the end, the good science, justifies the means, which is the bad money.
But Nadia uses the concept of being complicit to define an absolute moral boundary, an act that she believes will irrevocably poison the institution's future.
And her conclusion is just devastatingly logical.
It is. She argues that if they lose their reputation, they lose their ability to attract any funding long term. Even Omnicorp will leave once the PR value wears off.
So integrity isn't a luxury.
It's not a nice to have. It is the fundamental infrastructure upon which all future business is built.
So being truly pragmatic should never require losing your soul.
Because the ramifications of that loss will always, always exceed the short-term financial gain.
And that final point in the source material is the most challenging one.
Which it is.
The argument that even if the high-integrity path is slower, harder, and more painful in the short term, it is the only viable path for true, durable, long-term survival.
We have completed this deep dive, and we've examined 6 incredibly powerful terms that define the vocabulary required for high-stakes professional analysis.
We covered the language of survival. We started with the threat of becoming obsolete,
which is countered by the uniquely human quality of ingenuity,
which is required to drive a strategic pivot.
And that first case study with the architects, it showed that the key to survival is not resisting technology, but strategically harnessing it and redefining the human value proposition.
Then we moved to the essential language of accountability.
We looked at how the immediate necessity, often defined as being pragmatic,
must always be scrutinized to determine if it crosses the line into making you complicit in a larger wrongdoing.
which, as we saw, inevitably opens the door to profound long-term ramifications.
And the value of mastering this specific vocabulary for you, the listener, is the ability to achieve total precision in defining a problem.
So when you look at an ethical gray area in your own work, you shouldn't just be asking, what will happen if we do this?
That's too simple a question.
You should now be asking, is this short-term gain truly pragmatic, or is it simply a rationalization that will result in us becoming complicit?
And will that complicity trigger a network of costly systemic ramifications that we haven't even begun to project yet?
That's the level of analysis we're aiming for.
And that leads directly back to the tension between Elias and Nadia in our second case study.
Right. Elias presented the choice as a binary, a life or death decision.
Take the bad money or lay off the team. He utilized that classic false dichotomy to force a decision and shut down debate.
The ultimate ethical challenge then, and this is the provocative thought we want to leave you with, is this.
How often, in the high-stakes world of professional decision-making, is a difficult choice presented to you as an either-or, lesser of two evils scenario?
When in reality, a third, cleaner path, a pivot that requires more time, more ingenuity, and more strategic courage, is always possible.
Even if that third path is intentionally obscured by the pressure to be merely pragmatic.
The hardest work, it seems, is often not solving the problem that's presented to you,
but challenging the frame of the problem itself.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the vocabulary of ethical gray areas.
Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and use that language with precision.
Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we strip away all the noise. We take the sources you send us, the detailed reports, the case studies, all those high-level strategy notes, and we transform them. We turn them into immediately actionable intelligence. Our whole commitment here is pretty simple, really. If you're short on time, but you absolutely need to be proficient, you need to be well-informed, then we are that shortcut.
And today, we are diving deep into a subject that, it really governs success in almost every area of life. Influence. But we're not looking at, charisma or just sheer willpower. We're looking at the specific, almost surgical, linguistic tools you need for those high-stakes interactions, whether that's professional or, personal.
That is the mission for today. We are building out a sophisticated vocabulary. And it's not just for comprehension, it's for real conversational power. We've pulled out two very distinct, very critical sets of words, lexical sets from the source material. Each one is tailored for a specific kind of conflict. So we've got the language you need for negotiation and the language you need for setting firm social boundaries.
And you can think of it this way. One set of words is all about how you strategically maneuver when you want something, from another party. Usually it's a trade or a resource.
Right.
The second set, well, that governs how you strategically hold firm, how you define your personal space when other people are trying to take something from you. And that's usually your autonomy or just your peace of mind.
Yeah, it's the difference between using blunt force or aggression and just deploying the right word, the precise phrase at the exact right moment to shift that power dynamic right back in your favor. We're going to explore how to effectively gain leverage in a deal and then how to articulate a really firm but polite boundary at home.
So by the end of this deep dive, you won't just have, a list of definitions. You'll have a mental playbook, one that details exactly when and how to use these words to control outcomes.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting, I think, naturally with the high-stakes world of deal-making and strategy. Get ready for section 1, the language of influence and negotiation. All right, so for section 1, we have to start by establishing the foundational terms. The words professional negotiators use to really analyze the geometry of a deal. Our sources kept highlighting 3 terms that, they form this kind of indispensable tripod that all sophisticated negotiation rests on: deadlock, leverage, and concession.
These are formal terms. So understand their precision it's really key. Let's start with deadlock. A lot of people might use this, interchangeably with stalemate or impasse.
Sure, yeah.
But a deadlock, in a formal negotiation context, it describes a very specific standstill. It's a situation between opposing parties where progress is seen as strictly impossible, often because, fundamental demands clash in a way that just seems irreversible, or maybe core principles are at stake.
So the technical definition implies more than just being stuck. It's like a structural failure. It's not just that the discussion is difficult. It means the current path of that negotiation has hit a formal, recognized dead end, a point of termination. And it needs some kind of systemic intervention or maybe a complete rethink of the strategy just to move forward.
And this is where the sophistication really begins because, recognizing a deadlock is one thing.
Right.
Understanding its implications is something else entirely. A true deadlock forces negotiators to start considering external factors, things like time pressure, resource constraints, or, the very real possibility of just walking away. In fact, formal declarations of deadlock often trigger internal review procedures, or in international relations, it can lead to calls for mediation or so-called cooling off periods. These are mechanisms designed specifically to inject some novelty back into a process that's just exhausted.
I think the most important thing for you to recognize is the psychological weight of declaring a deadlock. As we're going to see in this Arthur and Clara case study, the mere declaration by one side, it signals this extreme fatigue, this frustration, and that can be interpreted by the other side as a strategic weakness.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if it's a totally accurate description of the situation, it's a moment of, immense vulnerability.
Correct. The declaration of deadlock forces a crisis point. If you're the one to declare it, you have to have a plan ready to break it, or you risk losing control of the entire process.
Which that leads us perfectly to the next concept, leverage. If deadlock is the problem, leverage is the potential solution. It's the power or ability to influence people or events.
In its simplest sense, leverage is the asymmetric advantage that one party holds over the other. The physical analogy, the lever moving a heavy object with minimal force, it's perfect. Because it speaks to that disproportionate influence. It's not just having something the other party wants, it's having something they absolutely need.
Oh.
It's holding the power to prevent an outcome that they fear.
And the sources really push us to move beyond that simple idea of just a bargaining chip. Yeah. Leverage itself, it comes in many different forms. Can you maybe walk us through the types of leverage a negotiator really needs to be able to identify?
Absolutely. We tend to categorize leverage strategically. So first, there's informational leverage. This is simply knowing more about the other side's true bottom line, their internal pressures, their weaknesses, than they know about yours.
Okay. The information advantage.
Exactly. Then there is time leverage. Who is under the most pressure to close the deal by a specific date? The party with less time pressure always holds the advantage.
And then there's maybe the most fundamental type of leverage, the one that often dictates whether a deal can even succeed at all. That's the BAT&A leverage, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
Exactly right. Your BAT&A is your plan B. If you can confidently walk away from the table because you have a strong alternative deal already waiting, you have superior leverage. But if your counterparty knows you have no other options, your leverage just evaporates. So understanding leverage means quantifying not just your own needs, but the relative strength of your alternatives versus theirs.
Which brings us to our third term, concession. So if leverage is what you hold, a concession is what you release. It's something granted, typically in response to demands, that helps get the negotiation moving again.
Yes, this is the transactional element, but we have to emphasize that a concession is strategic. It's not reactive. A successful negotiator sees concessions as a controlled expenditure. They're giving up something of low cost to themselves, but it has a high perceived value to the other side. And it's designed specifically to unlock a much greater return. Their core objective.
So it's like budgeting your losses to maximize your gains. And the best negotiators, they know the cost of every single potential concession before they even walk into the room.
Right.
That really sets the technical groundwork. Now let's see these three words: deadlock, leverage, concession in action. Let's put them in the crucible of high-stakes diplomacy with this case study our source material gave us involving two diplomats, Arthur and Clara.
The scene is tense. I mean, really tense. Arthur and Clara are facing a deadlock after 12 exhausting hours of talks. It's all over a persistent tariff issue. Arthur, who is representing his delegation, he's ready to just concede failure. His mental bandwidth is completely shot, and he declares the situation deadlocked because the opposing delegation is refusing to budge on a specific non-negotiable tariff percentage.
And this is the moment. This is where Clara shows what true strategic resilience looks like. She just refuses to accept Arthur's emotional declaration of defeat. She immediately challenges the finality of that word, deadlock. She asserts, and this is a quote, that it is only a deadlock if we stop talking. That right there is the first critical insight, transforming a statement of fact into a strategic choice.
It's a profound reframing, isn't it? She's saying, look, the obstacle is real, I get it, but our acceptance of it is optional. She pushes past that immediate frustration over the tariff and she forces them to reevaluate the opposition's core interests, not just their stated positions.
And the next strategic move is to immediately identify and then deploy their latent leverage. She realizes that the opposition's stated sticking point, this tariff is really just a smokescreen for a much larger, unspoken priority.
And that priority, as the source notes reveal, is access. Access to Clara and Arthur's nation's cutting-edge tech sector. This access is absolutely crucial for their long-term economic plans. It far outweighs the immediate revenue they'd lose from this agricultural tariff, this intense need that becomes the powerful yet currently unactivated leverage.
Okay, so how do they go from just realizing they have this leverage to actually using it? Clara proposes an active, time-sensitive strategy. Remind the opposing party that their current tech contract with their regional rival, let's just call them Nation Z for simplicity, that contract expires next month. If they don't sign this deal right now, Nation Z gets exclusive locked-in rights.
This is a beautiful application of scarcity and time leverage combined. But Arthur is right to raise the immediate red flag. He's worried. He fears this tactic is going to be seen as a direct threat, that it will destroy any goodwill they have left and potentially just collapse the entire negotiation. And he's not wrong. If you threaten someone, even implicitly, you force them into a defensive, oppositional stance.
And Clara's linguistic counter move is where the genius is. She reframes it instantly. It's not a threat, it's a reality check.
This is such a critical distinction for anyone listening who wants conversational power.
It really is. A threat is subjective,
Yeah.
often manipulative. It's, if you don't agree to my terms A, I will retaliate with some punitive action B. It relies on subjective, emotional pressure.
Right.
A reality check, when it's supported by real leverage, is objective. It's the market conditions and the contractual dates mean that if you maintain your current stance on the tariff, which is X, the unavoidable and documented consequence is that Nation Z secures the tech access Y.
So by using reality check, she anchors the whole conversation to objective consequences and established deadlines. She's not saying, we will punish you. She's saying, the clock will punish you. That phrasing maintains dignity on both sides of the table. It's crucial. It allows the counterparty to save face. They can recognize this reality check as an external pressure point, not some personal attack from Arthur and Clara. It demonstrates firmness without aggression, which is exactly the posture you need when you hold superior documented leverage. When you're the one holding the strong hand, your voice should be measured and objective, not emotional, and definitely not begging.
So the moment they agree to deploy this reality check and activate their leverage, the tech contract Arthur immediately pivots. He knows what's coming next. He knows the opposition is going to demand a concession in return. Specifically, they'll demand that Arthur and Clara drop the agricultural tax.
This is the predictable symmetry of a sophisticated negotiation. It's like Newton's third law. A high-value leverage deployment has to be matched by a corresponding expenditure, even if that expenditure is strategically minimal. And Clara, she anticipates this perfectly. She analyzes the demand, dropping the agricultural tax.
And she then argues for what the source material brilliantly labels the smart concession. So what makes dropping this agricultural tax a smart concession?
Well, it's smart because it is a minor concession that costs their side very, very little, especially when you weigh it against the massive economic gain of locking down this tech deal, the agricultural tax. It was a relatively small, politically sensitive, but fiscally, it was an expendable item in their overall budget. It was, in effect, already pre-budgeted as a throwaway item.
And the purpose, as we kind of touched on, is almost entirely psychological and diplomatic. It's about ensuring the opposing party can claim a victory.
Precisely. Successful negotiation isn't about crushing your opponent. That's a rookie mistake. It's about making sure they have the necessary internal validation to agree to the deal. And this is crucial to uphold it later. They need to be able to go back and tell their superiors, their constituents, whoever, that they won something tangible, that they forced Arthur and Claire aside to give up something significant.
You sacrifice the crumb, this relatively minor tax cut, so you can secure the whole cake, which is major tech contract dominance. It's really just the cost of maintaining the counterparty's ego and relational trust.
The source material quotes Clara, summarizing this flawlessly. She says, "A smart concession is the key to breaking a deadlock. You give them a crumb so you can take the whole cake." 1-0. That right there is the operational definition of a successful transactional exchange.
But let's dig a little deeper into the metrics of a smart concession. How does someone actually determine which concessions are minor and which are major? It can't always be obvious.
No, it's not. And it requires meticulous pre-negotiation work. You have to do your homework. You have to quantify three things. One, the actual fiscal or political cost of the item to your own side. Two, the perceived value of that same item to the counterparty, which is often much higher than its actual cost to you.
Ah, okay. The perception gap.
Exactly. And three, the item's position relative to your core objective. So if giving up item A unlocks your core objective B, and the cost of A is less than the gain of B, then A becomes a smart concession, even if it feels difficult to give up in the moment. In this case, the tax cut was strategically located far, far away from their core objective, the tech sector access.
So if we connect all this to the bigger picture, this entire strategy, it really hinges on understanding that negotiation is fundamentally a psychological exchange. It's not just a resource exchange. Arthur and Clara had to pivot from seeing the tariff as this insurmountable obstacle, the deadlock, to identifying their true source of power, the leverage, and then budgeting their sacrifice, the concession, to manage the very human need for dignity and success on the other side of the table.
And the ability to shift the power dynamic in any negotiation depends entirely on the precision of this vocabulary. It gives you the language to analyze the situation, to articulate the crisis point, to locate that asymmetric advantage, and then to budget your losses strategically.
A perfect demonstration of strategic movement. Now let's pivot entirely. We're going to move from strategic movement in, high finance and diplomacy to strategic stillness in our personal lives. Section 2. The language of boundaries and validation. The pressure points in our lives, as we noted, are rarely multi-million-dollar deals. More often they're far more insidious and personal. The awkward family dinner, the colleague who critiques your work process without being asked.
Oh, yeah.
Or the neighbor offering unwanted life advice. This section is all about establishing social boundaries and using sophisticated language to counter unwanted judgment.
This is the language of subtle self-defense.
Yeah.
But it's executed with polish and formality. It's how you maintain your autonomy without escalating a conflict. And for this, we introduce our second lexical set: presumptuous, unsolicited, and vindicate.
Let's start with presumptuous. I think this is one of the most powerful words available when someone has overstepped their bounds. It means failing to observe the limits of what is permitted or appropriate.
It is so much more potent than just calling someone rude or arrogant. When you label an action as presumptuous, you're making a specific intellectual critique. You're accusing that individual of assuming a right, the right to comment or judge or advise on your life, a right that they objectively have not earned or been granted.
It gets right to the root cause, which is that the person believes they have some kind of inherent superior authority over your personal choices, often based on age or title or just a mistaken sense of intimacy. Using the word immediately elevates your critique from just a subjective emotional response, "you hurt my feelings," to an objective assessment of their social entitlement.
This is so crucial because effective boundary setting is about clarity, not emotion. To call someone's comment presumptuous is to formally identify that they have crossed a predefined line of respect and appropriateness. It is a very sophisticated mechanism for saying, this is none of your business and I recognize that you believe it is.
Okay, next up we have unsolicited, simple meaning, not asked for, but its power lies almost exclusively in how it's deployed, specifically in the phrase unsolicited advice.
Yes. That phrase acts as a formal linguistic boundary marker. When advice is unsolicited, it immediately shifts the dynamic. The advice giver is attempting to establish an expert-to-novice relationship. They're assuming a superior position to impart their wisdom. And the recipient, who did not invite that hierarchy, is instantly put into a defensive position.
And the vast majority of frustration around unsolicited advice, it doesn't even stem from the quality of the advice itself. It comes from the breach of the social contract inherent in its delivery. It's the sheer act of being judged without your consent.
And finally, we arrive at vindicate. This provides the satisfying resolution, the counterforce to all that critique. To vindicate someone is to clear them of blame or suspicion, or to show that they were right or justified or reasonable all along.
It's that profound sense of emotional satisfaction you get when your decision, one that was often criticized by others, is ultimately proved correct by objective results. It's the moment when factual evidence finally catches up with your personal conviction.
So let's see how these terms play out in a really common personal scenario. This one involves a woman named Maya venting to her friend Ben about her Aunt Susan. So the source material presents this classic high-pressure family dynamic. Maya is just incredibly frustrated with her Aunt Susan. The aunt is constantly overstepping by critiquing her parenting choices, specifically focusing on Maya's decision to send her son to public school instead of some costly private one.
And this isn't just generic criticism, is it? The source notes say the aunt went into these painful, detailed lectures about the perceived deficiencies of public education, the necessity of networking for future success, and she even implied that Maya wasn't prioritizing her son's future because of, financial caution.
Right. And Maya immediately recognized that the offense was more than just irritating. It was an act of boundary violation. She describes her aunt's behavior as so incredibly presumptuous. The word choice here is highly precise.
Why? Because the aunt wasn't just offering a suggestion, was she? She was making an arrogant assumption, an assumption of knowledge about Maya's finances, her son's aptitude, and Maya's core parental values. The aunt believed she had the inherent right to offer commentary on choices that were absolutely not her business, not her purview.
And that speaks to the psychological burden that this kind of boundary crossing imposes. Maya is forced to defend her choices because her aunt has assumed the authority of a judge. And as the source material highlights, the core of the problem was that the advice was entirely unsolicited. Maya confirmed she was just trying to enjoy a meal. She wasn't seeking advice or validation on her life choices.
This highlights such a crucial point for anyone listening. The problem with unsolicited advice is that it creates an uninvited power hierarchy. The giver positions themselves above the recipient. So even if Aunt Susan truly believed she was being helpful, the very act of delivering that advice without an invitation immediately put Maya on the defensive.
And Maya's initial reaction was what most of us would do, a polite verbal defense. She just stated that they were happy with the public school, but as often happens with presumptuous individuals, polite defenses are just. They're ignored or argued through. The critical assumption of superiority remains unchallenged.
Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting, because the narrative gives us this moment of just undeniable, perfect counter-strategy. It's like the universe intervenes with a moment of perfect, synchronous timing right in the middle of the aunt's lecture.
The perfect counter-argument just arrives. Maya's son, totally unaware of the tension in the room, he brings home his report card. Straight A's. Glowing teacher comments about his engagement and his progress.
And analyze the action here. Maya just slides the report card across the table. That is the moment of feeling completely vindicated. It's the silent victory that shuts the entire argument down.
The profound power here is that the grades themselves vindicated the parenting choices better than any verbal argument Maya could have possibly mustered. If Maya had kept arguing, the conflict would have just escalated. It probably would have damaged the relationship further, or at least given the aunt more conversational oxygen to justify her presumptuous stance.
But the report card, it provided an objective fact, an external, undeniable measure of success. The aunt's critique was based on the suspicion that Maya was making a poor choice. The straight A's completely cleared Maya of that suspicion. The proof was irrefutable.
The source material really emphasizes that this was a silent victory, because it instantly neutralized the aunt's subjective opinion with objective evidence. The argument wasn't won by superior rhetoric, it was won by demonstration. And that's a critical insight into managing judgment. Evidence often speaks much louder than defense, particularly when the critic is deeply committed to their own worldview.
I want to spend just a moment on the psychological impact of this vindication. For you listening, what is the value of receiving that kind of external proof versus just, believing in your own choices internally?
Well, the internal belief is essential for navigating the judgment in the first place. You have to have that. But the external proof, the vindication, it serves a function for the relationship. It sets a formal, factual precedent. It tells the aunt, and anyone else observing, that future criticism based on these same assumptions will be met not with a shouted defense, but with demonstrable facts. It provides a formal, factual endpoint to the argument. The emotional relief that Maya experienced, the source says she felt ready to frame the report card, that is the satisfying release from the pressure of constant unfair scrutiny. Which leads us directly to a practical application for you, the listener, when you're dealing with similar situations. And this applies both personally and professionally. Because while silent vindication is powerful, you often need a preventative measure.
That's right. You can't always wait for a report card to show up. If you are cornered by someone offering criticism or unwanted advice, you need sophisticated language to establish a formal, firm boundary before you need that evidence to speak for you.
The source material champions a specific strategy for this. If you need to sound sophisticated and formal while rejecting help, using this phrase is extremely effective. Thank you, but I prefer not to receive unsolicited advice.
The power of that phrase is all in the word unsolicited. It acts as a formality barrier. It's polite, you're starting with thank you, but it's firm because you're pointing out that the conversation has strayed into inappropriate territory, and you're doing it without calling the person rude or presumptuous directly, even though that meaning is clearly implied.
It immediately shuts down the conversation because it challenges the fundamental premise of the interaction itself. The advice was given without invitation. There is no polite conversational counter-response to that precise declaration of preference. The overstepper is forced to acknowledge that you are in control of the information you receive, and you did not consent to their input.
Let's just contrast this with a weaker response. If you say, I didn't ask for your opinion, it sounds defensive, it can sound aggressive, and it might just invite more conflict. But saying, I prefer not to receive unsolicited advice is formal, it's professional, and it draws a bright, clear line.
Yeah, think about a workplace context. If a colleague is constantly critiquing your project management choices, saying, I appreciate your input, but unless I specifically request it, I prefer not to receive unsolicited advice on my methodology, is incredibly precise and effective. It focuses on the act of giving the advice, not the person giving it, which minimizes the relational damage while maximizing your autonomy protection.
It really emphasizes the strength of specific language and boundary setting. It provides a kind of linguistic armor. The vocabulary here, presumptuous, unsolicited, vindicate, it gives you the tools to analyze the assault, articulate the boundary, and then relish the ultimate resolution. So, we have successfully synthesized the core components of influence today. Across two very distinct but interconnected realms. Our deep dive has given you the language for strategic movement and negotiation, trading minor concessions for major leverage to break a deadlock, and for strategic stillness, drawing those firm, polite boundaries against presumptuous and unsolicited overstepping.
And the value, as we hope we've demonstrated through these expanded case studies, it doesn't just lie in defining these 6 powerful words. It lies in understanding the psychological and strategic architecture of when and how to apply them to shift the power dynamic in your favor.
Yeah, we went from high-stakes diplomacy, where the goal is tactical give and take, right? Managing the other person's ego to achieve a greater good, to high-stakes personal dynamics, where the goal is just maintaining your personal autonomy and resisting uninvited scrutiny. And in both worlds, the right language is what makes you the dominant player.
And we saw that the greatest sense of long-term victory, whether that's achieving a complex trade agreement or just protecting a deeply held personal choice, it often comes from being vindicated, from having your position proved right, whether that's through a deal successfully closed or just some irrefutable evidence confirming your strategy was sound all along.
Now, this raises an important question for you to mull over after this deep dive, something that connects the preemptive strategy of Section 2 with the reactive power of evidence. In social dynamics, which holds more sustainable power? Is it the articulate spoken boundary you establish using formal words like presumptuous and unsolicited to preemptively stop a conflict? Or is it the undeniable silent evidence that vindicates your choices after the critique has already been delivered?
That's a good one. Because the spoken boundary, that requires high emotional capacity and intellectual effort in the moment. It forces you to articulate a formal line when you might just want to shout. The silent vindication, on the other hand, requires patience and performance. It allows the criticism to land, but you know your long-term actions will eventually neutralize the attack. So for next time, consider which approach is most effective when your emotional energy is critically low. Do you conserve energy by articulating the formal boundary up front, or do you rely on performance and results to speak for itself down the line?
We hope this comprehensive vocabulary equips you with the strategic clarity you need for both the boardroom and the living room. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Be strategic, be precise. We'll catch you next time.